5 years ago, in the beginning of 2021, during the height of the COVID lockdowns, only 2,000 people were listening to my videos. But I came out 2021 with these 12 videos back to back. Some of you remember. For some of you, these are going to be pretty new. But it was 1902, the Forgotten Dark Age, followed by 1902, the Hidden Reset, the Fog and Mass Vanishings, the Jesus Enigma. Another video was the Crucifixion and the Phoenix. And then 1902, the Simulacrum Exposed. This is followed by Ragnarok, Survivors of Fenris, 2040. Then Anunnaki Designer DNA, an Anunnaki racial protocol, Survivors of the World Before, Anunnaki Incorporated, racial branding of humans during the Neolithic. And the final 12th video was PreFlood people shocked at the first appearance of Caucasians. These 12 videos have been edited down with their intros and their outros completely eliminated and cut off. All the extra verbiage is gone, just the core material for your convenience, all run through one video. I hope you guys enjoy it. This is a throwback to the first 12 videos of 2021. The man who would be known as Charles Fort was born in Albany, New York on August 6, 1874. He died in the Bronx on May 3, 1932, almost 58 years old. In ordinary longevity, Charles Fort was anything but normal. One of the last of a dying breed of rogue intellectuals, Fort was a thinker. What science has failed to do for itself, he has done for the layman. Fort's legacy is preserved today in 1,054 pages of his continually republished books. Between London's British Museum archives and the New York Public Library, he spent 27 years amassing the most unusual compilation of historical data ever released to the public. He stands as a pillar of erudition, impervious to any weight of criticism, for his source materials are impeccable. The Proceedings of the Academy of Natural Sciences, American Antiquarian, Archaeological Journal, British Astronomical Association, the Carnegie Institute, Chemical News, Comptes Rendus, Edinburgh Review, Essex Naturalist, Geological Magazine, Intellectual Observer, Journal of Asiatic Society, Knowledge, La Arenat. These are just a few. Of his 4 books, there are 3 we are concerned with. Fort's astronomical and geological data span 833 pages of documented reports, witness accounts, and studies in the Book of the Damned, published in 1919, New Lands, published in 1923, and Lo, 1931. The collected material spanning 334 years, from the year 1597 to the year 1931. Fort cataloged thousands of findings, events, observations, and discoveries from around the world. Amazingly, in this 334-year stretch of history, there is only one small period noted by him as distinct from all the rest: 1901, 1902, and 1903. Very specifically, 1902. These years are noted in all 3 books and receive more of his attention than any other time period. To Fort, the prophet of the unexplained, these 3 years were not merely visited with unusual localized phenomena, but were worldwide, as well as interplanetary in scale. Fort notes that in 1902 appeared a strange new star, a light-reflecting body. Newtonian astronomy unable to account for what was clearly observed in 1902, this star was quickly forgotten on the principle that what cannot be readily explained need be readily ignored. Unable to assail Fort's sources and unwilling to entertain his conclusions, the academic community bullied him with silence. A pillar to the laity, he was poison to the learned, an oracle of insight ignored into obscurity. In the beginning of the Book of the Damned, he wrote, "In this book I assemble some of the data that I think are of the falsely and arbitrarily excluded, the data of the damned. I have gone into the outer darkness of scientific and philosophical transactions and proceedings, ultra respectable, but covered with the dust of disregard. I have descended into journalism. I have come back with the quasi-souls of lost data. We take the position that our data have been damned upon no consideration for individual merits, unquote. What offended the scientific establishment more than anything were Fort's conclusions. He said other worlds were near to this Earth's surface. He also said vast celestial vagabonds have been excluded by astronomers because they have not been seen so very often. However, light or dark, they have been seen and reported so often that the only important reason for their exclusion is they just don't fit in. Ford also said of vast worlds that are orbitless or that are navigable or that are adrift in interplanetary tides and currents. Nowhere in all of Fort's writings is there a reference to Phoenix as a planetary body, but intriguingly, in his book New Lands, he wrote that objects seen to obscure stars are planets, all of them not conventionally recognized as planets because of eccentricity and remoteness from the ecliptic. To so confidently publish these assertions induces us to again examine some more of Charles Fort's amazing resources. The London Royal Society Proceedings, the Magazine of Natural History, Manual of Astronomy, Meteorology, National Geographic Magazine, North American Review, Popular Astronomy, Popular Science Monthly, Records of Geological Society, Reliquary, Science, Scientific American, U.S. Geological Survey, the Weekly Dispatch. Our appraisal of the value of Charles Fort's research dictates that we must review it chronologically and begin at 1901. On February 13th, 1901, a deep greenish-yellow cloud canopy spread intense darkness over the whole of France. On the 16th, over Michigan in the United States, the wind died and a brown dust-like vegetable matter fell from the sky, bringing extreme coldness. On the 18th, observers in two different areas of London saw what appeared to be a comet, and a red substance fell with the snow near Mildenhall, England. Pigeons were even seen to eat it. On February 22nd, 1901, a new star appeared in the heavens in the Perseus constellation, seen by Americans, Europeans, and as far as Kiev in Russia, all northern hemisphere. Astronomers asserted that a spectrographic analysis revealed that this new star to be 300 light years away, and the newspapers picked up the story. But to the embarrassment of the astronomers, the newly appeared celestial body shot out nebulous rings that moved at a rate of 2 and 3 seconds of arc a day. This far exceeded the speed of light, demonstrating that the object was much closer to the Earth than the astronomers had believed. In his book New Lands, Charles Fort wrote, when the new star in Perseus appeared in February 1901, it was just a point of light. Something went out from it, giving it 6 months a diameter equal to half of the apparent diameter of the moon. The appearances looked structural. Ford believed the dusts of 1901 and 1902 that fell on Earth from space came from this object. He notes that 3 years earlier, Dr. Epson, on January 16, 1898, observed something that looked like a cloud in the constellation Perseus. Dr. Epson wrote, whatever it was, it had the peculiar property of dimming and blotting out the stars. It moved into Perseus and then it moved away. On March 10, 1901, only 16 days after the appearance of this object in the sky, a great amount of red dust fell from the sky on Sicily, Tunis, Italy, Germany, and Russia. A thick orange-red stain was reported from Ongar, Essex, England. In Austria, while the dust fell, the earth quaked. On March 11th, as dust rained on Tunis, earthquakes afflicted Algeria. On March 12th, ashes fell from the sky at Avellino, Italy. A new star in Perseus. Dust rains on the earth. Academia is quiet. Charles Fort, ever the philosopher in his findings, wrote, we substitute acceptance for belief. The more firmly established, the more difficult to change. And this was the problem with the scientific establishment. To Fort, to believe firmly in anything is to impede development. He maintained the existence of unknown planets and that dusts were, quote, things cast out in what is called space by convulsions of other planets, unquote. His conclusion, drafted before the year 1919, we are again in awe of some of his source materials. The American Academy of Sciences, the Annals of Scientific Discovery, the Bulletin of Seismographic Society, Chambers Journal, Cosmos, Edinburgh Annual Registrar, the Encyclopedia Britannica, The Field, Gloucester Journal, Human Nature, the Journal of British Astronomical Association, L'Année Scientifique, Magazine of Science, Nature Magazine. As in 1901, we find that the events of 1902 were also preceded by a few weeks by the appearance of a new star, this time in Gemini, as seen from South Africa. This was on the 16th. In April and May 1902, across a zone of this Earth, also outside the zone, there were disturbances. More than Earth-wide relations are indicated, according to Ford. Ford itemizes a long list of these events. Volcanic eruptions of Mount Pelée, Martinique, at, I can't pronounce this, La Saphire on St. Vincent, and an earthquake in Siberia as mud fell from the sky in Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and in Connecticut in North America. On May 7th, the sky over France turned black. Soot and water like ink fell upon Parc Saint-Maur. On May 10th, a great number of highly colored objects like little suns were seen in the sky over South Devon. Later in May, in 1902, spectacular meteoric showers occurred over the West Indies. Earthquake shocks occurred in Spain and France, a volcanic eruption in Mexico, quakes in the Fiji Islands, a violent quake in Iceland, and a volcanic eruption at Cook's Island, Alaska. In Rangoon, Burma, it so happened that the most terrible storm that ever occurred was remembered. A remarkable meteor seen in Calcutta and in Java, I guess it's Raung volcano, erupted as rumbling came from an extinct volcano in the country of France. Over Guatemala, a thunderstorm with terrific electrical discharges dumped enormous volumes of water during an earthquake. We are not finished with 1902 by half. Thus far, in this thesis, our Phoenix thesis has involved the month of May, the transits and local phenomena involving our world of an object in the skies that the ancients referred to as Phoenix, that dumped mud, red rains, red sand, bloody water, whatever, however the ancients described it, over and over and over. And Charles Fort's 1902 data now indicates phenomena on a solar system-wide scope. And again, a new star appears, but this time not in Perseus or Gemini, but in the southern constellation Puppis, as reported in popular astronomy. It appeared in October, and Fort again theorizes this new star is responsible for the following phenomena. In October 1902, vast amounts of smoke-like haze of unknown origin obscured all things at sea from the Philippines to Hong Kong and the Philippines to Australia. It was so thick it impeded navigation. This blanketing of the southern Pacific was only a couple weeks before a series of atmospheric fallouts that would not end until well into 1903. By November 12, 1902, our world had traveled along the ecliptic to the opposite side of the sun as it was positioned 6 months earlier in the month of May. On November 12th and 13th, 1902, occurred the greatest fall of matter in the history of Australia. Upon the 14th of November, it rained mud in Tasmania. There was a haze from Australia to Hong Kong, hundreds of millions of tons of matter that fell upon Australia, Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, and Europe in 1902 and 1903. Blankets of dust and sometimes mud caked ships to where all hands had to be reported on deck just to scoop and shovel mud off the ships in order for it not to capsize. As dust, dirt, and mud rained on Australia, the densest darkness lit up with glares. Fires were falling from the sky as seen through giant pockets of mud. Balls of fire from the sky fell upon and ignited the ground in every district of Victoria, even setting fire to houses. At Weissenproof, the whole air seemed on fire. Buildings were burnt in Bort, Allendale, Delinquin, Langdale, and Chiltern. This incendiary sky was followed by a rain of red dust and darkness through about 50 towns in Australia. They suffered this darkness and disasters, and Ford wrote, little of this tremendous occurrence has been told in the publications that are said to be scientific. It has been ignored. Australian reports read that there was nothing like it before in the history of the colony, with people stumbling about blind with lanterns. On the same day, November 12, 1902, ashes with sulfurous odor fell in New Zealand. A meteorite fell at Kamsagar, Mysore, India, and disastrous flooding happened in the Malay states. 7 bridges carried away. Also, volcanoes erupted at Kilauea, Hawaii, and on the 13th, a volcano at Savi in Samoa erupted, and at Windward Islands, West Indies, Stromboli, and Mount Chulapata in Peru. That's my best guess. Over Parramatta, Australia, and on the 13th, a meteor exploded. 5 days later, on the 18th, a fireball fell, exploding terrifically at Karkor. At Murrumbara, Australia, dust and a large fireball fell from the sky. Ford notes that on this day, the new star and puppet shined at its greatest magnitude when a 6-foot tidal surge struck the coast of southern Australia. On the 20th, Sir Charles Todd of Adelaide Observatory reported a large fireball was seen moving so slowly it was observed for a total of 4 minutes. On the 21st, a fireball apparent size of the sun was seen at Taurida. An hour later, several towns illuminated by a great fireball or an explosion. The next day, on the 22nd, a fireball passed over the town of Nangan, Australia, intensely illuminating the night and ground, and a fireball exploded at Ipswich, Queensland. Though Fort covered 334 years of documented reports, he specifically focuses on 1902 and 1903 as particularly unique. Concerning the contorted scientific reasonings of his day, he wrote in the book Lo that it belongs to the Dark Age, or the other Dark Age, of the year 1902. Despite the knowledge of the ancient Ionian Greeks who knew that fallen stars were stones from the sky, Ford notes that as late as November 1902, in Nature Notes, pages 13 through 23, an actual member of the Selborne Society still argued that meteorites do not fall from the sky and that they are masses of iron upon the ground in the first place that attract lightning. This ridiculous blindness brought out Fort's cynical humor. He said, "I do not know what the mind of an astronomer looks like, but I think of a fizzle with excuses revolving around it." Fort observed that scientists have perpetuated the most ridiculous notions rather than to admit the arrival of dust from somewhere beyond this world. Or, as put by Charles Fort, sands from other worlds or from their deserts, red rains that very strongly suggest blood, or finely divided animal matter, debris from interplanetary disasters. Also, in his book, The Book of the Damned, he wrote, "I begin with the notion of some other world, from which objects and substances have fallen to this earth. Every living thing upon this earth may ancestrally have come from somewhere else." This is amazing for conclusions that were made just from reading scientific reports over a century ago. Ford believed that the things he found documented as having fallen from the sky were from the surface materials wrenched away from another world. In 1919, this was a fantastic notion. We can only marvel at Fort's own source materials once again. The American Journal of Science, the Catalog of Destructive Earthquakes, Entomological News, Journey of the Franklin Institute, Les Mondes, Monthly Weather Review, Notes and Queries, Observatory, the Quarterly Journal of the Geologic Society, Science Monthly, Smithsonian Institute Annual Report, the Victorian Naturalist, Yearbook of Facts, Zoologist Magazine. Fort's findings and conclusions were an assault on the cherished conventions of the scientific community, but he did not lay much to their charge, noting, "No scientist has ever upheld a new idea without bringing upon himself abuse from other scientists. Science has done its utmost to prevent whatever science has done." By way of explanation, in the Book of the Damned, he wrote, "The world of astronomers is in a state of terrorism, though of a highly attenuated, modernized, and devitalized kind. Let an astronomer see something that is not of the conventional celestial sights, or something that is improper to see, his very dignity is in danger." We are left with the impression of vast debris fields strung around the sun along our orbital path on the ecliptic. This notion is strengthened in Fort's analysis of the year 1903. On February 14th, Valentine's Day 1903, the blackest of darkness over Australia occurred, followed by a deluge of dust and mud upon 40 towns in New South Wales and Victoria. The material that fell in Australia fell about as enormously as that fell in the dusts of Europe. It was a tremendous blanketing of dust, dirt, and mud straight from the skies over Europe. For several days, the south of England was a dumping ground from somewhere else. Red dust fell as far away as the Canary Islands and on the 19th. On the 27th, this fall of dust continued in Belgium, Holland, Germany, and Austria. A vessel reported that dust fell into the Atlantic midway between Southampton and Barbados. In England, it was estimated at 10 million tons of fallen matter, and again, 50 tons per square mile in Australia alone. Also, at Switzerland, Russia, and from February to March 1903, dust and discolored rains fell along the western coasts of Africa. Fort wrote that the matter is variously described as brick dust, red dust colored, as reddish raindrops and gray sand, quite red, yellow, and brown. Chemists of the time proclaimed that tests of the red dust revealed 9.08% organic matter or as much as 36% organic matter, depending on the sample that was taken. As 1902 was called a dark age, 1903 is the other year specifically commented on by Fort. He said, "I think myself that in 1903 we passed through the remains of a powdered world, left over from an ancient interplanetary dispute, brooding in space like red resentment ever since." Unquote. Fort published his opinion that the near approach by another world to this world would be catastrophic. Also, he said, "I accept that some of the other worlds are of conditions very similar to our own. I think of others that are also very different." Though the reports came from all over the world, Fort notes that the astronomers in 1902 and 1903 remained quiet, loathing to ponder an origin for dust outside of our world, while meteorologists pontificated that storms kicked up African sand from the Sahara. Fort searched the weather reports of the time. There were no storms in the Sahara, in Africa. He also shows that the sand of the Sahara is white, not red. Nor were any volcanic eruptions occurring in 1903. However, Charles Fort does note something unusual: the appearance of a new star. For those of you who have followed my Phoenix research in my book, When the Sun Darkens, and then Nostradamus and the Planets of Apocalypse, and then in my 13, 14, or 15 videos on the Phoenix phenomena, you will know by this time that this is a common denominator. The event recorded in history as the Great Flood, and over 40 different ancient texts all refer to the appearance of a strange star before this cataclysm occurred. When the Neolithic maritime empire collapsed in 1687 BC in the month of May, it was by the appearance of a strange star by many ancient chronographers that the cataclysms began. Several times throughout the old world, many accounts and traditions record this phenomenon. A strange star appears and is always in Perseus. We get this, if you recall, in the legend of Perseus, the Kraken came out of the ocean. Perseus was the hero, but the sun darkened in that myth, and the city of Joppa and other Mediterranean cities were destroyed in the flood. The Perseus constellation seems to be a mass collection of very unusual stars called variable stars. And we're going to get into that and do another video about this unusual holography of apocalypse that's in our sky. That these variable stars are not stars at all. They are not luminaries. They actually perform a machine, an engineering function, and its effects are felt on our Earth. That could be because we are so small and insignificant that these translate to us as catastrophic. But we'll get to that in another video. I just wanted to point out that Charles Fort noted in 1902 that these cataclysms were all prefixed by the appearance of a new star. In Fort's book, Lo, we read, "It was found by a professional astronomer upon photographs of the constellation Gemini taken upon March 8th, this new star appeared. It may have existed a few weeks before somebody happened to photograph this part of the sky. A luminary is not necessarily a star, but could just just as the same be a light reflecting body, a planet, even moving toward or away from the inner solar system. Over 2 months later, on May 20th, 1903, Professor Lowell of the Lowell Observatory observed a dust cloud on the terminator of Mars that moved 300 miles in a few days. Less than 3 months later, on August 9th, 1903, a red luminous object was observed by 4 persons using field glasses for over a 20-minute period. Like Phoenix, this object was moving from north to south. That is another common denominator of all the Phoenix phenomena. It was always an object that darkened the sun that had suddenly appeared out of the northern heavens, passed over the ecliptic, traveling southward to vanish again once it was off the ecliptic. It did not travel along the plane of the ecliptic like all the other planets do, like we do. Any correlation between the appearance of new stars in 1901, 1902, and 1903 and the dust blanketing Earth is still a mystery. Fort believed they were connected, and so worldwide was this deluge of cosmic dust. He wrote that it was the greatest atmospheric cataclysm in the history of the world. Despite the academic animosity, scientific disregard for Charles Fort's work and theories, his sources were of the highest reputability. Astrophysical Journal, Chemical News, Elements of Astronomy, English Mechanic, Leeds Astronomical Society, Journal of Royal Meteorological Society, La Nature, La Astronomie. We have Memoirs of the National Academy of Sciences, Nautical Meteorological Annual, Report of the British Association, Sidereal Messenger, Tim's Yearbook, U.S. Weather Bureau Report. These are just some of Charles Fort's documented events for 1901, 1902, and 1903. Every 138 years, somewhere on this world, the Phoenix weapon destroys whole regions with quakes, volcanism, flooding, sonic reverberations, electrical discharges that vitrify structures, or buries communities under rains of mud from the sky, and is also connected to the disappearances of whole human populations. As we exist within a controlled holographic environment, the simulacrum, each 138-year period manifests events that mirror or are linked and connected to other historic events that occurred in those 138-year episodes. This means that the widely documented occurrences in 1902 are holographically connected to all the prior Phoenix destructions, and this fact is further demonstrated in the unfolding of events in 1902 that Charles Fort did not document. Here are events in 1901, 1902, and 1903 intrinsically connected to the Phoenix history. The Cincinnati Astral Society published a prediction that a new comet would soon be discovered and that it orbited an unknown planet. This happened in 1902 with Comet Morehouse, photographed as it broke apart, and the scientific community theorized at the time that it did orbit an unknown body, not the sun. Interestingly, also in 1901, the Astral Society predicted that a gigantic passenger steamliner would sink between Britain and the United States with a loss of life primarily due to inadequate lifeboats, which did occur 10 years later or thereabout with the Titanic. In May, Mount Pelee explosion that killed over 30,000 people in a blast of superheated gas is widely known. It was also mentioned in passing by Charles Fort, but what happened afterward is not widely known. Quickly after the volcanic explosion, it was noticed by the scientific community that plants and animals returned to Martinique, but were much bigger than usual, exceptionally sized plants, animals, and insects. Even the on-site researchers, Dr. Jules Gravure, grew 2.5 inches taller, and his assistant, Dr. Round, aged 59, grew almost 2 inches. Interestingly, Martinique had previously been visited by Christopher Columbus. In 1902, a volcanic eruption covered the ancient Olmec site of Abai Takelik. The Olmeca, as shown in our prior videos, were wiped out in a Phoenix cataclysm, and their final date still marked the year 31 BC in our calendar, which is a Phoenix visitation year. In 1902, Sir Norman Lockyer research on Stonehenge was complete and published in his book Stonehenge and Other British Stone Monuments. The site destroyed in 2239 BC and again in 1687 BC, Phoenix catastrophes, both times re-erected by locals and mentioned many times in our prior videos. Minoan Crete, the city of Knossos in the Mediterranean, excavated from 1901 to 1903, a civilization that was destroyed several times, including the catastrophic resets of 2239 and 1687 BC by the Phoenix phenomenon. Again, our prior videos cover these topics. Just seconds after being sighted by the crew of the ship Algonquin, the SS Bannockburn vanished in Lake Superior in 1902. From a distance, the crew of the SS Veronica reported strange lights in the sky. The ship could not have sunk in seconds, and searching the lake, a massive effort to search the lake was conducted over years, and even today, Lake Superior has never revealed the location of this ship. All 23 men on board were never seen again. In the Gulf of Guinea, the stunned crew of the SS Fort Salisbury in South Atlantic witnessed a gigantic construction descend from the sky and lower into the ocean in front of their ship. It was dark, about 600 feet long, and it disturbed the water as it submerged. It also had a light at each end. This object is perfectly described as those seen in the skies over Europe in the year 1347 that were blamed for the Black Death plague. Please see our video. We have shown that the figure of Enoch is connected to both the Great Pyramid of Giza in traditions as he is to the Phoenix. Interestingly, in 1902 was published the most authoritative translation of the Book of Enoch ever done. It was done from 15 ancient manuscripts by Dr. Fleming in Leipzig. In 1901 was born Hans Bellamy, who would study the records of history and publish fascinating books, all relative to the Phoenix phenomenon, without ever linking these cataclysmic episodes to the Phoenix mythos. He wrote the book Moons, Myth, and Man in 1936. The Book of Revelation is History in 1941. Built Before the Flood was published in 1944. In the Beginning, God in 1945. The Atlantis Myth in 1948. And Plato and Horbiger in 1945. Over and over, Bellamy references Phoenix disasters without knowing they are all connected, even mentioning that the Maya were familiar with a 2,760-year cycle, which is a Phoenix sum. It is precisely 138 times 20. But his conclusions were not accepted by the establishment historians of the time. For 3 years since 1899, mineralogist and archaeologist William Niven excavated deeper in some ruins in northwest corner of the Valley of Mexico and came unexpectedly across vast layers of what appeared to be very ancient ruins, whole prehistoric cities lying as deep as 30 feet below the plain, which appeared to be overwhelmed by a series of cataclysmic tidal waves. That was his conclusion. Niven found an arched wooden door that had petrified the stone. The walls of this house were bound by a cement that was harder than the stone itself. One uncrushed room 30 feet long was found to be completely filled with dirt. Niven discovered 3 new minerals, citriolite, thorgon, and nenevite. And in 1921, he excavated at a depth of 12 feet at Santiago, Ahohuizotl, in Mexico, a series of stone tablets with very unusual pictographs. 975 of these were found at first, but he continued excavations and eventually unearthed 2,600 of these tablets. They were cataloged, and the top Mayan scholar of the day, Sylvanus G. Morley, concluded that they were unlike anything he had ever seen. Niven in 1902 discovered this unknown American civilization. 1902 being a Phoenix year, these cities have most assuredly met their end by an undocumented Phoenix cataclysm. So perfect was that destruction that we have no records of what this civilization, what time period, who these people were, who their descendants were. We know nothing. History has absolutely been erased by the Phoenix cataclysm. The scientific community had a book written about the discoveries, but coded anagrams in the narrative so the public could easily decode the anagram as reading "not really" in the title, and other hints that Niven's discoveries were untrue. This type of censorship has gone on for over 100 years. The scientific establishment has been caught over and over and over publishing false narratives in their efforts to cover up true discoveries. In 1902, excavations in the ancient Assyrian capital of Nineveh began. Tablets and Akkadian were discovered everywhere. The Code of Hammurabi was excavated, the text conveying laws of ancient Babylon as passed down from the Anunnaki. Also, the Babylonian tablets, the Enuma Elish, translated into English from the Akkadian, read that in the beginning, the whole world was covered in blood of the slain dragon Tiamat. By this we understand that at a cataclysmic event in a pre-literary period, reddish rains fell from the sky just as they did in 1902. Budge and King published the Annals of the Kings of Assyria, wherein is read in the records of King Ashurnasirpal II from Akkadian texts about the location of Mount Nasir where Utnapishtim, this is the Sumerian Noah or the Akkadian Noah, where his ship came to rest after the flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh. This was 1902. So it's very curious that also in 1902, George Hagopian, an Armenian, trekked up Mount Ararat in Turkey during a time when the ice cap was diminished. He explored a giant wooden ship. Its timbers were petrified at 12,000 foot elevation. Many claim this to be Noah's Ark. Soon afterward, though, a Russian scientific expedition visited the site with the military. They visited the relic, they located it, they visited it, they measured it, they went inside, they measured all the chambers, they photographed everything, they returned to the government right in time for the Bolshevik Revolution. And the Bolsheviks seized the records and they have never been seen since. Also in 1902, Valerio Stace happened upon an ancient device in the donated materials from the Museum of Athens. This was the famous Antikythera device found in 1901 by sponge divers from the wreckage of a sunken ship from about 60 BC. Valerio realized the differential gears were a part of a device mechanism, but he was ridiculed, silenced, and ignored by the establishment. Later, Dr. Derek de Sola Price determined that the device particularly indicated the year 586 BC and was used to calculate astronomical dates both forward and backward in time. Zechariah Sitchin determined the date was actually 584 BC. It is my opinion that the Phoenix year 583 BC is the true year, and that Thales of Miletus in 585 BC used just such a device when he famously predicted the darkening of the sun 2 years before it happened in 583 BC. In 1902, Gaston Maspero founded the Egyptian Museum and began removing artifacts from the Giza Plateau. He succeeded Auguste Mariette of the Egyptian Antiquity Service. Maspero in 1902 also organized a massive multinational coalition of archaeologists that began working at different sites at Giza, the Sphinx, and Egypt's ruins. He compartmentalized these groups and almost censored, almost disallowed any communication between them. All information had to be filtered through his office. In the year 1879, Major John Wesley became the director of the Smithsonian Institute and the U.S. Bureau of Ethnology, its very first director. During his 27 years at the Smithsonian, he oversaw the systematic destruction of anomalous artifacts and archaeological reports concerning gigantic human skeletons, technological relics excavated, and discoveries of old world visitations found throughout North America. Old ships were purchased by Wesley's office and packed with artifacts and burned in the Atlantic. The director Wesley died in the year 1902. In 1903, Jesuit priest Emmanuel Magri began excavating the many thousands of human skeletons from the Hypogeum, some with bizarre elongated skulls. He found pottery, other small objects, and diluvian sediment deposits. After the excavation, Father Magri was sent by the Vatican to Tunisia, where he mysteriously died. His drawings, excavation notes, and observations of the Hypogeum on Malta, the ruins, were all vanished. The ruins of Malta are the subject of our other videos on the Phoenix destructions that occurred in 2239 BC. Despite the systemic cover-ups and establishment censorship of findings, there was something the scientific establishment was now paying attention to. In 1902, we find the first year that the United States initiated a new program of amassing data archives on natural disasters. While the word reset has entered the popular culture today, it primarily invokes the image of a catastrophe, a mud flood, a post-apocalyptic event. But we must recognize that this simulated holography we exist inside will first lay down the infrastructures that it will later reset. The past is always a predicate for the future, and for this reason, the simulacrum and its programmed agents continually suppress discoveries and even ideas. Our books and numerous videos explain the Phoenix weapon history and show that it will cause a worldwide destruction, a reset of apocalyptic proportion in May 15th or 16th of the year 2040. And by studying the inventions and infrastructure building that suddenly appeared almost out of nowhere in the 18-month period between late 1901, all of 1902, and early 1903, we discover exactly what the Phoenix weapon will totally end in cataclysm in our year of 2040. The remarkable and instant beginning of so many things we take for granted today was also a reset event. We have been technologically advanced many times before. It only takes 200 years to go from horse and buggy to Hadron Collider. And our vast potential as world builders is the reason for the Phoenix weapon's existence. Suddenly, almost as if out of nowhere, all of the following came into existence at basically the same time. Fluorescent lighting by American Peter Cooper Hewitt with his mercury vapor lamp. The assembly line was invented by Ransom Eli Olds while designing his curved dash Oldsmobile. This was an assembly line that Henry Ford a decade later would improve by making it a moving conveyance rather than a fixed line. Powdered coffee is manufactured for the first time and invented by Japanese-American chemist Satoru Kato of Chicago. J.C. Penney department store chain was begun by James Cash Penney. The first fast food restaurant opened, a cafeteria-style automat in Philadelphia. Whole meals were obtained from coin-operated slots and glass displays. Pepsi Cola is invented. 25-year-old engineer named Willis Carrier in the United States invented the air conditioner. Ray Kroc is born. He is the founder of the worldwide McDonald's Corporation. The Tour de France bicycle race is founded. The Electric Theater opens in Los Angeles, the first full-time movie theater in the U.S. The French movie maker Georges Méliès, I guess that's how you pronounce his name, he released his grandest production, considered his masterpiece. He became the father of science fiction and cinema with his film A Trip to the Moon, which was an instant success. The first successful brain surgery performed by Dr. Harvey Cushing of the United States. American Automobile Association, AAA, is founded in Chicago. Carnegie Institute, founded in Washington, D.C. The teddy bear created by a Brooklyn toy maker, immortalizing the stuffed animal popular today. The Wizard of Oz debuted as a musical in Chicago. Harvard Stadium was built in Boston, the first stadium built specifically for American football with almost 40,000 seating capacity. First football game in the United States for this league is played. Dartmouth gets 11, Harvard has 0. Marie Curie creates artificial radiation. Orville and Wilbur Wright succeed in the first manned flight at Kitty Hawk. The Red Sox win the first World Series in baseball. Harley Davidson is founded. The Hunchback of Notre Dame debuts an opera. Nathan Stubblefield makes the first public demonstration of radio in Pennsylvania. Heaviside of England and British American named Kennelly discovered that radio waves bounce back from the sky, making possible long-distance transmission of signals. The first Rose Bowl is played, Michigan beating Stanford. The first Empire Day celebrated in Britain. This is relevant. You'll get to this in a minute. May 15th, Lyman Gilmore is the first person to fly a powered aircraft. New York's underground subway construction is at its height. The line will finally open in 1904. The cornerstone is laid in May 1902 for the famous New York Public Library. Items about New York are of interest because its history began on a Phoenix year, 1626, as New Amsterdam, and the city itself will be destroyed in May 2040 by Phoenix, as shown in our other materials. 1902 was the first year of operation of the United States Steel Corporation of Charles Schwab and J.P. Morgan, a vast enterprise that catapulted America into a frenzy of city, naval, and military building, a second and more lasting win to the Industrial Revolution. Co-masonry is founded in America, allowing women to join the order. Turner Construction is founded, which later ends up owning its Fortune 500 companies. It owns so much of the world. Turner Broadcasting, you would be surprised. This began in 1902. Threatened by a growing number of academic biblical critics, the Vatican establishes the Pontifical Biblical Commission to oversee the works of theological scholars to ensure that they do not stray from papal agendas. The United States creates the Census Bureau to maintain a count of the population. Washington, D.C. is planned out and the capital scheme is reworked, employing Masonic designs. The International Council for the Exploration of the Sea is founded. The United States very quietly changes the Great Seal of the Phoenix to the eagle. This is addressed, and we show actual pictures of both seals before and after 1902 in our other Archaics videos. Coal strike of 1902, first time the U.S. government intervened as arbiter in a labor dispute, the result being the beginning of arbitration and federal labor oversight. The White House under Roosevelt is modernized. 1902, the United States National Park System was begun. The relevance? National parks have areas that are closed off from the public. They disallow public expansion and often conceal facilities that the general public has no knowledge of. The U.S. establishes the New Lands Reclamation Act to build funds from sale of government lands to build irrigation dams for arid regions of the West. This too is relevant. We'll get to that in a minute. 1902 was also the publication of a periodical called the Rand Daily Mail in Johannesburg, which begins the globalist media empire's campaign to weaken all Western European founded governments by creating divisive racial tension between blacks and whites, a campaign in full effect even today in 2021. Vladimir Lenin founded the Bolshevik faction of the Russian Jewish Social Democratic Workers' Party in London. This globalist front of the elite are the reason the history of this particular 138-year period has unfolded. In 2040, their power will be broken in the international banking cartel, their infiltration of all world governments, their control of both the media and Hollywood will end on May 16th, 2040. Now, the suddenly appearing aspects of our present everyday infrastructure are starting at the same time indicates in the holofield that they will terminate as abruptly as they appeared. This means that in 2040, the Phoenix appearance will not be quiet as it was in 1902. It will be an epic catastrophe that will suddenly end power grids, fluorescent lighting, assembly lines, manufacturing, automobile use, department stores, fast food, restaurants, instant foods, beverages, recreational activities, sporting events, oil or natural gas production, theaters, schools, toys, technology, medicine, treatment, surgery, radio communications, aircraft, libraries, public transportation, women's rights. U.S. and Britain will be crippled. The return to coal use, collapse of law and order, genocides, migrations to newly appearing regions formerly under sea. The U.S. Reclamation Act of 1902 is connected to 2040 in that the United States is going to have to continue its survival. It will have to reclaim former lands that were under sea. As we show in our prior videos on the Cataclysm of 2040, Nostradamus, Ursula Southhill, and several other prophetic texts all infer that the oceans will slip their basins. New lands will be discovered because there were formerly ocean beds. The topography of our world will be fundamentally changed. It will be a pole shift. But remember, we're not actually on a planet hurling around the sun. We are inside a simulacrum of a universe that perpetuates the idea through visual optics that we are on a planet going around a sun in a solar system. But we're actually confined in a Dyson shell-like prison. It is a prison of sense perceptions. It is an illusion. It is called the simulacrum. The year 1902 is one specifically pointed out by the French prophet of Jewish ancestry known to us as Nostradamus. David Ovason, in his The Secret of Nostradamus, provides evidence that the prophet believed that the year 1901 began the last days of the sun. Of course, it is my belief that Nostradamus meant 1902, and there is evidence of this. In 1994, members of the Italian National Library in Rome discovered buried in their archives a formerly unpublished and unknown fully illustrated manuscript written by Nostradamus himself. The Roman author and Nostradamus expert Ottavio Cesare Ramati, in his own book, Nostradamus, the Lost Manuscript, wrote that concerning the year 1903, the prophet Nostradamus left us this message. He said, "Many will die before the phoenix dies." Trickster gods, haters of humanity but restricted in particular ways from any widespread intrusion. Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 vanished in the spring of 2014. Just as much evidence that it disappeared upward than it crashed into the sea. News networks focus our attention on search grids, the pilots' personal lives, the socio-political controversies of Islam and Asia. Frantic misdirection to muddle the waters, to forget the revelation of Charles Fort that we are owned. That Flight 370's almost 300 victims were abducted. Not a single piece of wreckage found because the aircraft never fell. No transponder signals, emergency maydays, no desperate phone calls, no black box, no eyewitness, enveloped by another dimension entirely. Only over the seas are mass human vanishings occurring, as any serious Bermuda Triangle researcher knows, like Jean de Caesar or Bruce Gernon. Our distant predecessors of Sumer and Babylon asserted that mankind's creators came out of the sea. Over 1,000 ships and aircraft have vanished without a trace in the Devil's Triangle region just in the past 25 years. Transdimensional predators taking people where? Abductions over water of whole crews and passengers, radar blips disappearing, and networks remain silent. Malicious humor to place undamaged yet fragile civilian aircraft on the ocean floor with keys not in the ignition. 2 have been found, neither with any human occupant. Tricksters watching, observing our behavior, gods of the sea. Some futuristic Poseidon trickster, but somewhat restricted on land. They laugh at our fortitude, our intellectual ability to rationalize away anomalous conclusions in the maintenance of our explainable world. We embrace lies because the alternative is too painful to bear. There is a common denominator between many survivors of unusual phenomenon where reality itself seemed to corkscrew the sky, the whole world, the existence. It's very difficult to explain because it's almost as if this hologram that we're living within, it was either coming unraveled and turning into something else, and people observe this, but they have no frames of reference to describe what they were seeing. But the common denominator to this, when people were flying, they're on boats, flying in planes, and they've left these testimonies to us, and many of them are published. The common denominator is they entered or they first came into contact with an unusual fog. The fog, seen by so many people in the Bermuda Triangle area, that appears when ships or aircraft vanish, appears as a yellow, green, or gray haze. This is not a fog or mist, but a neutralized field, the visual evidence of contact with an intruder dimension. The haze is an effect, not a cause, of a breach in our dimensional spatial geometry, a non-local phenomenon distorting our space-time structure based on 3.1416 and 1.618. That is pi and phi physics. Our entire world runs on this structure. Pi and phi multiplied together is curvature, which is 5.08. It is the third constant that our entire world is basically running on. This is coding by which our physics constants are attached to. Without mathematical resonance between 2 different dimensional geometries, a victim finding theirself inside the interface envelope sees haze, and in such an unstable, non-local time, the victim is suspended until he is either pulled into the intruding dimension or the interface envelope recedes, leaving him intact, taking the fog with it, often leaving him disorientated. This fog is an overlapping of dimensions. The dimensional overlap creating a mobile, non-local trap to extract humans in our 4th dimension. Well, basically, we're living in 3 dimensions, but we exist in 4. Everything is moving. So it's a trap to extract us out of this 4th dimensional reality into a higher realm, akin to the abduction of a mouse from a maze. The non-locality interface leaves humans disoriented, disrupts radio and electronics, is hidden from radar and the bandwidth of the EMS the human eye can sense. The UFOs that we are seeing in the skies that move so erratically are not vehicles at all. They act more as range finders and probes controlled by intelligent beings in a higher dimension. They are actually concentrations of non-locality that can balloon out into interface envelopes to trap and abduct humans. This means we can and are being observed. That our dimensional assailants are not gods. That these quantum field envelopes of non-locality are difficult to control and they are unstable, sometimes launching an intended victim forward and backward in time to the envelope's perimeters. These are not portals, wormholes. Even higher dimensional aggressors cannot plug victims out of the architecture of our own space-time matrix without error. Pi and phi arithmetic have long shown us the mathematical echoes of a higher dimension, but Newtonian physics has blinded us of the holographic nature of reality. As an intellectual subroutine embedded into a complex interactive holographic program, we humans do not have the sensorial apparatus necessary to perceive the actual unreality of reality. It is with great difficulty for subjective sentience to objectively analyze an environment that it is suspended within. Fish need not understand water to flow through it, and the denizens underwater know nothing of the cloud waters above. This transdimensional anomaly will remain unprovable because it is the perfect intrusion. Eyewitnesses cannot see an interface envelope, and the accompanying yellow-green haze encapsulating the victim cannot be seen from any vantage point outside of the anomaly. To objectively ponder what is not occurring affords us more clarity on what exactly is transpiring. Alien abductions is a very well-documented phenomenon. Abductions are almost always over land and victims are returned, the vast majority female, though there is more evidence that victims' minds are manipulated to believe they are victims of extraterrestrials than that any aliens were actually involved. Over the oceans and seas and Great Lakes, humans are abducted and not returned, the majority being males and often in groups. In both phenomena, UFO-like lights are prevalent. Space-time distortions and myths appear to obscure environs. But prison blocks are not emptied. Buses full of passengers not whisked away. Aircraft inland very seldom vanish. The diseased are never taken. Hospital patients remain unmolested. Why? The answer is easy. We are being observed. Immoral, unethical intelligences. But it does not want to draw widespread suspicion. It takes females in their beds and males who are in motion. Women return, but men are kept. Strange surgical scarring on ovaries of women who never underwent any operation. Healthy, virile men, sometimes whole crews of cadets. A breeding program. The human genome is studied. Perhaps an old species hacks into our biology, breeding hybrids as a means of its own continuity. But it either fears discovery or its operations, or it is impeded in some way, a governing force, a spiritual police, so to speak. A predator preys on humanity, but it is in some way restricted. Somewhere outside our space-time holography are cells full of naked men having no contact with one another, each thinking he is the only one. Naked, terrified women from around the world are brought to them. Their copulation is observed, studied, documented. The electromagnetic fog phenomena documented in the book called The Fog by Robert McGregor and Bruce Gernon is evidence of the holographic essence of reality. Localized yellow fog encapsulating jets, planes, and ships moving to intercept, locomotion with intelligence, the invisibility to weather radar, malfunctioning electronic equipment, visions of people and lost vessels, total inability to see the horizon, evidence of higher dimensional interface. We are limited in our ability to interpret paranormal phenomena because we are fourth dimensional observers without higher dimensional frames of reference. A two-dimensional insect perceives presence of a human as a thing of phenomena, not a self like itself. The strange fogs, glowing balls, dripping UFO lights, elaborate crop circle designs, freak unforeseen storms, alien abductions, vanishings of aircraft with occupants. spontaneous combustion, and a whole host of unexplained phenomena only makes sense by recognizing that we as humans are interactive subroutines suspended within a vastly complex programmed hologram. A program that higher dimensional intelligences can and have influenced and infiltrate. Though a lower dimensional observer sees a disk of light, the phenomenon only appears so. What is really there or occurring can only be perceived accurately by observers in a higher dimension. These experiences tell us that the manipulators can only or will only manipulate directly lower dimensional reality in a very local sphere. Either they are incapable of widespread, wide-scale geometrical manipulation of our holospheric environment, or they are prohibited in some way and fear discovery, or for some reason do not want to interfere. That they can alter a program necessarily implies that we can too. Our story begins in the 750th year of Rome, which was 42 Roman Julian, or 2,236 years after the flood, 1,896 years after the Babel dispersion. It is 1,444 years after the Exodus event. It is the 1,404th year of Israel. It is 742 years post-exilic chronology. This is, in our calendar, 3 BC, which was the year 3892 Annus Mundi. In 3 BC, a series of 9 planetary conjunctions beginning in the month of May on May 19th begins, and they will continue on through August 26th of the year 2 BC. It is believed by some that these conjunctions were what the Magi in the East were watching for, signs revealing the birth of the Saeshyant. I believe that's pronounced correctly. The savior of the Gnosis, in the end of the 31 centuries of the Black Age of the Kali Yuga. On May 19th, the first and last planets, Mercury and Saturn, conjoined. On June 12th, this was followed by a Venus-Saturn conjunction. Then on August 12th, a Venus-Jupiter conjunction. Then on August 31st, a Mercury-Venus conjunction. On September 14th, a Jupiter-Regulus, which is the King Star, conjunction. This final alignment was 108 days before the first day of 2 BC. Mercury was the messenger planet. Saturn is the planet of mystery, and in ancient Hebrew symbolism, Saturn was the reaper, a messianic planet, the harvest being humanity. Venus was the newcomer and the planet of love to the Romans. Jupiter was the king of the planets, and Regulus is the king star of the zodiac, one of the 4 cornerstones of the zodiac, so actually in the constellation Leo, the lion. 4 stars form the base of the cosmic pyramid. These are Regulus in Leo, Aldebaran in Taurus, Antares in Scorpio, and Fomalhaut in Aquarius. The pole star is the apex of this great celestial pyramid. This combination of conjunctions was enough to give those watching something to pay attention to. The Magi of the East continued to watch the heavens, and they did not have long to wait. In 2 BC, on February 17th, Jupiter Regulus conjoined. On May 8th, Jupiter Regulus conjoined again. On June 17th, Jupiter Venus conjoined. And on August 26th, Jupiter conjoined with Mars. So Mars now joins this collection of conjunctions, a planet of war. Now, combining all of these planetary concepts, the meanings behind them that appeared in 3 through 2 BC, we have an astronomical statement that reads conceptually as message of one who is first and last, whose new coming is a mystery to mankind, who is loved, a new message from King of heaven and earth, who brings judgment by fire, and for mankind wages war against the enemy. Now, Christian tradition, without historical verification, claims that the Magi searched out Judea seeking for the birth of a child that they knew to be the Saeshyant, the Messiah. These wise men brought gold, incense, and myrrh as relics that were to be given to the Savior in accordance with very ancient instructions. Now, Christmas Eve was not the birth of Jesus or the Christ, but the date when the Magi delivered the gifts 120 days after the birth of the one that they came to call Jesus. It was the date mankind accepted for his divinity. But this date, December 25th, was already known throughout the ancient world, in the Mithraic traditions, among the Magi, in the Zoroastrianism, at Phrygia, in Asia Minor, concerning the birth of Attis, the birth of Dionysius, and a host of other ancient savior gods. The 2 BC date for the birth of Christ is indeed very intriguing in the historical record and for a variety of ways. Pay attention to this list. Tertullian wrote that Jesus was born 28 years after Queen Cleopatra died in Egypt. Now, we all know that her death was in 30 BC. Thus, 28 years would be 2 BC. Irenaeus wrote that Jesus was born in the 41st year of the reign of Augustus Caesar, who came to power in 43 BC. 43 minus 41 is 2 BC. Apollonius was born in 2 BC, a Samaritan miracle worker. In 303 AD, Hierocles wrote in a work called Philalethes, I can't pronounce that, claiming that the entire Jesus story was manufactured around the life of Apollonius. This is the subject of another video. Geoffrey of Monmouth wrote that London was founded in the 2885th year Annus Mundi, or 1010 BC, and that Jesus was born 1008 years after the founding of London. Well, 1010 BC minus 1008 years is 2 BC. Biblical chronologist Stephen Jones, in his epic work, The Secrets of Time, basically cataloging all the chronomarkers in the entire Old and New Testaments, wrote that Jesus was born in 2 BC. His source materials are the Assyrian Epinons and many pseudepigraphical works, very interesting work. Vedic scholars assert that the Kali Yuga, or the Black Age, countdown to the coming of the Savior was 31 centuries, 3,100 years. And this ancient Indian calendar is dated by scholars to have begun in 3103 BC. That is absolutely amazing. Some hold, because of the difference in the beginning of the year, this is actually 3102 BC, which is precisely 3,100 years before 2 BC. By researching the geometrical timeline encoded within the interior dimensions of the Great Pyramid, E. Raymond Capt wrote a book and determined that Jesus was born in 2 BC. Gematria specialist Bonnie Gaunt published a series of books in which she finds, in her studies, number codes in the biblical records and determined through gematria alone that the birth of Jesus was in our calendar 2 BC. The author of Luke chapter 3 verses 1 through 2 wrote that John the Baptist appeared in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. This statement is exactly where the Gospel of Marcion begins. Oh, I know y'all don't know about the Gospel of Marcion. We will be doing a video about that. But in the Gospel of Marcion, which is believed to be the original Gospel, not to be confused with the Gospel of Mark, Tiberius' reign began in 14 AD, and adding 15 years to 14 AD gives us 29 AD for when John began baptizing in his ministry of repentance. In verse 23, we read that Jesus was baptized when he was about 30 years old. This targets 2 through 1 BC as the birth of Jesus. The dating of 2 BC as the birth of Jesus Apollonius by so many sources is rather remarkable, considering the fact that almost the entire Christian Catholic world believes that this birth actually occurred in either 7 or 4 BC, the latter following Archbishop James Ussher's chronology, which is absolutely an error. Even if Joseph and Mary are mere inventions, the fact remains that Jesus, even in the gospel accounts, was not Jewish but Galilean. Galilee was a distinctly non-Jewish region referred to by the prophet Isaiah in the Old Testament in a messianic passage, quote, as Galilee of the nations. The word nations in Hebrew is foreign peoples. Galilee was full of foreign peoples. This messianic passage in Isaiah continues, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. The Lord sent a word unto Jacob, and it hath lighted upon Israel, and all the people shall know, even Ephraim, the scattered Israelites, and the inhabitant of Samaria." This is an ancient Israelite prophecy. It was centuries before the birth of Jesus. If the calendrics for 2 BC was to reveal the birth of someone of global spiritual importance, it does not show in any way on any timeline. That we don't have historically verifiable records from the ancient world concerning the life of Jesus is a problem for many. We don't have any records outside of church sources and church materials. But in 1 AD, right after the birth of Christ, it is not without significance that in this year the Roman Emperor Augustus ordered the destruction of over 2,000 volumes of the Greek prophecies. An apparent attempt to forget the future. Much of what the Greeks knew was from the early Ionian sages who were closer in succession from their ancient Israelite forebears. The Apocalypse, known as the Book of Revelation, was among those ancient Greek preserved writings on the future that had not been destroyed. A copy had been preserved, a text masked in later Christian garb. Though it's not mentioned anywhere in the life of Jesus as recorded in the scriptures, when Jesus was 7 years old, there was a full-scale Roman invasion into German territory that was thwarted when sudden uprisings occurred in Roman-occupied Pannonia and Dalmatia. The census of Rome occurred in Judea and Rome's eastern holdings, which in those regions was overseen by a governor of Syria named Quirinius. The census was very unpopular, and Judas of Galilee led an uprising against the Romans, supported by the feared Jewish assassins called the Sicarii, or the Dagger Men. This same Judas of Galilee is mentioned in the biblical book of Acts, chapter 5, verse 37. When Jesus was 15 years old, a major uprising on the German frontier, the Romans were opposed by hordes of Germans, and it was suddenly stopped when all of a sudden the moon on a cloudless night disappeared from the sky. It later reappeared and then faded out again. So unusual was the event that it quelled the entire rebellion and peace was restored. When Jesus was 18 years old, a major earthquake shock went through the entire Roman provinces. 12 cities are documented to have been erased, just disappeared, sank into the ground. The topography, whole mountains appeared throughout Roman provinces. Cartographers had to remake maps in the year 17 AD or 17 Common Era, whichever you prefer. Here's another event which is not mentioned anywhere in the New Testament records, and yet it was mentioned by many historians of the time. It's the year 29 AD. Jesus and John are both 29, 30 years old. John the Baptist begins preaching and prophesying of the coming of the Messiah, known symbolically as the Stone of Israel. We are told that John is a cousin of Jesus. The story of the gospel is a complex one, a bane to the historian. For nothing in the gospel story was chronicled until at least a century after the events depicted. What the early Christian faith was actually already existed at this time, but in a myriad of forms. We arrive to 30 AD, the year 3924 Annus Mundi. It is the year 3700 of the Jewish calendar, 960 of the divided kingdom calendar. If the gospel and apocryphal story was recorded accurately, then in this year King Herod imprisoned John the Baptist and beheaded him at the whim of his daughter, who was prompted to ask for John's head by his mother. Later, before several witnesses, this same girl was skating on the surface of a frozen lake when she plunged suddenly through the thin ice and was decapitated. This is Herod's daughter. Her head remained on the ice as her body floated off below the icy surface. The man history has passed on to us as Jesus was not from Judea. He was not a Jew, but even after almost 20 centuries, he still remains a total mystery. Jesus was Galilean. Galilee becoming one of the most important places of early Christianity. Galilee did not border Judea, and nor was it made of Judean people. Galilee was a metropolitan region densely populated by many different ethnic backgrounds situated on a major trade route. It was a region of strong Hellenistic influence, and the major language was not Aramaic or Hebrew. The Galileans spoke Greek. After his baptism, Jesus went straight back to Galilee, and the scriptures read, he went back to Galilee preaching the gospel of the kingdom of God and saying the time is fulfilled. What time? What time he referred to is really unknown. However, it is fascinating that this year was exactly 1440 years, a major golden proportion Fibonacci number after 4111 BC, when the Israelites conquered King Og of Bashan and Sihon of the Amorites for possession of the lands that would later be called Lower Syria, where Galilee and Samaria were located, not Jerusalem. This was also, well, we're talking Galilee and Samaria, we're talking about the ancient kingdom of Israel here, if some of you aren't following. This was also the year 960 of the divided kingdom calendar, when Israel seceded from Judah and became the northern kingdom of Samaria in 931 BC. This year of Jesus' first year of ministry began a 40-year countdown to the total destruction of Jerusalem and Judea and the temple by the Romans at the end of the Jewish War in AD 70. It is held that Jesus fulfilled the prophecy in the book of Isaiah the prophet, where he wrote, "In Galilee of the nations, the people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They shall dwell in the land of the shadow of death. Upon them hath the light shined." The Jewish animosity against Jesus was ethnic. The inception of Christ's ministry offended the Jews, for Jesus taught and revealed only ancient Israelite articles of faith, quoting Israelite prophecies, and nothing of Jewish context was mentioned by Jesus unless uttered in condemnation. The Jews had become so separated from their earlier Israelite pedigree that they completely alienated their own kin in Galilee. They didn't even recognize them. In their defense, the Jews focused not on Jesus' teachings, but on where he was from, Galilee. The Jews proudly said, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Shall Christ then come out of Galilee?" Also they said, art thou also of Galilee? Search and look, for out of Galilee ariseth no prophet. This is what the Jews said. The Jews of the day, and hence then, have practiced a tainted religion they had brought out of Babylon, an admixture of Hebraicism and the new system of beliefs called Talmudicism, never before known in Israel or Judah. Jesus chose his disciples not from the Jews, but from Galilee, with only Judas being Jewish. The Jews considered the Galileans to be Gentiles. This rift was not only in culture, character, and geography, but genetic as well. The Galileans were formerly ancient Israelites in wandering after the Assyrians deported them in 745 and again later, 24 years later, in 721 BC. They have been called many names: the Cimmerians of Samaria, the Simri, Gimri, Gemiri, Galutha, the Gauls. In fact, geographically, Galilee was the same land allotted to the 10 tribes of Israel after the Exodus by Moses. When the tribes were giving out their inherited territories, the nation of Israel was 10 collected tribes. That geographical region is Galilee and Samaria, like the Good Samaritan. Because of the Greek migrations from the days of Alexander of Macedon, 3 centuries or more earlier, in the building of the Decapolis, which is the 10 Greek cities of the area, Galilee was thoroughly Greek with a dense population of Samaritans and Syrians. Judaism was strong too, because the region had been forced by the point of death over a century earlier to convert to Judaism. The forced conversion was a way to enrich the Jewish temple treasury. As the Jews by this time were an admixture of Judahites, Babylonians, and Edomites, they appeared racially different from Jesus. The ancient Israelites were a very fair-featured people, with red hair being very prominent. Epiphanius Monachus wrote that Jesus was 6 feet tall, his hair long and golden colored, with skin ruddy in complexion. Even as late as the Renaissance era, the masterpieces depicting Jesus depicted him and his mother, Mary, with red hair. The ancient Judahites shared the same features, but not the darker featured Jews 6 centuries later. Galilee was called Gaulanitius by the Romans, who knew that Galilee was settled by the Gauls. The Gauls were the direct descendants of Israelites in wandering. Even their neighbors, the Samaritans, by their own account, were the descendants of an admixture of people descended from the 10 tribes of Israel formerly deported. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, writing over 50 years later, may have mentioned Jesus in his monumental work, writing that an unnamed Samaritan leader was killed by Pontius Pilate and that the Roman was sent to Rome to answer for his crime before Tiberius. As a Galilean, Jesus could easily have also been referred to as a Samaritan. To the Jews, they were one and the same. The very first proponents of Christianity in the form we recognize today were Galileans, and their first followers were Samaritans and some Jews. The whole Galilean movement was founded by Syrians, for this region was Lower Syria. Grant Allen, in 1897, wrote in his awesome book, Evolution and the Idea of God. He said, "Whatever else may be said of Christianity, it is at least fairly agreed on either side, both by friends and foes, that this great religion took its rise around the personality of a certain particular Galilean teacher by the name of Jesus." The following year, in 31 AD, things began to take on a whole new form. By this time, the controversy over Jesus was widespread in Galilee, Samaria, and Judea. Though the gospel account holds him as a king of the Jews, Jesus never made this claim, asserting that he was a king only. Others claim he was a conqueror come to subdue the nations, to make them subservient to the Jews. But his message was not of a conqueror. In the Vatican archives, in an account of an encounter between Pilate and Jesus before his trial, Pilate wrote that the Jews that hated Jesus were darker skinned and dark eyed, while Jesus was fair haired and fair skinned. This is a Vatican text that is widely published, and I don't know why more people don't know about it. The Vatican archives have also yielded forth another account of Jesus, one very little known. A close friend of Caesar, who was descended from an equestrian family named Villius Particulus, wrote an extensive book called Historia Romania. Historians attest that Particulus was once a widely known Roman historian. This is not contended. He had written about Mithridates, king of Pontus, and about the Trojan War. Villius Particulus wrote that when he was 51 years old, he passed through Judea on his way back to Rome after 16 years of military service was over. He wrote that he witnessed a man named Jesus, and that Jesus was the most interesting person he had ever seen, a curer of disease, helper of the poor, and a raiser of the dead. He wrote that among the Jews it was a matter of controversy at that time as to who Jesus was, but the Roman statesmen declared that he was more afraid of Jesus than of a whole army. The writings of Particulus have not survived and are found only in quotations from other authors. However, this text was allegedly discovered by accident over 100 years ago in the Vatican archives. Scholars believe the citation to be a blatant forgery. Paterculus calls him Jesus of Nazareth, Nazareth being a later Christian invention. No place existed at the time when Jesus was actually alive. But being called a Nazarite identifies him with being an Essene. Further, the miracles were also a later invention. The Essenes were from the Dead Sea area. These people are the ones that preserved many writings and they buried them in the cave. You know those writings today as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Interestingly, in their own writings, the Essenes themselves considered themselves to be descendants of the true Israelites. They believed in the teacher of righteousness, who was killed and then rose from the dead, a prophet. As we will see, this was a very ancient faith. The Essenes and the Druids maintained basically the same belief systems. The Druids were the spiritual leaders and guides of the Gauls, and even as early as the 1890s, historians have noted that the Druidic faith was very close to original Christianity. Isaiah the prophet declared that God would one day in the future, after the 7th century BC, reveal his word to Israel not through the Hebrew they spoke at the time, but through another language. Isaiah wrote, "For with stammering lips and with another tongue will the Lord speak to his people." And now the shocker. For the Hebrew word used for stammering in this prophecy is Gael, which is the origin of Gaelic, the language of the Gauls of old, a tongue later preserved in early Scotland, Ireland, Wales, the tongue of the Manx. Gaelic is the Celtic mother tongue. In Jesus' final year, AD 33, which was the 77th year of the Roman Julian calendar and 777 years since the 10 tribes were deported into Babylon, Jesus declared that I am not sent but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Judah continued to honor the law and the prophets, though they added Talmudicism, and for this their strong affinity toward tradition, the Jews are easily identifiable in Roman times as they are even 2,000 years later. There was no change. Their culture had remained stagnant. It had remained the same. The Jews have never been lost. All know who they are. The Jews assumed that the covenants belonged only to them, for they still possessed Jerusalem and their lot in the land of promise, they being totally oblivious that millions of people in those days were already dispersed throughout Asia, Africa, and Europe, who were also the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Israel. To the Jews, the other countless millions were also to be ignored by God. Those in deepest Africa, the Middle East, India, and the Far East, and those rumored to be living on the other side of the world. To the Jew, only the Jew mattered. By excluding the entire world from the promises of God, the Jews cursed themselves when Jesus was taken to Pontius Pilate, and when the Jews cried, "Let his blood be upon us and our children," as Pilate washed his hands of the matter. The Greek word lost, as in lost sheep, is apolumai, which is made of root words meaning separated by punishment. This was a reference to the 10 tribes of Israel deported in 745 BC for their worship of Baal and Asherah, according to the Jewish redacted text of the Old Testament. Who the lost Israelites were is clearly seen in where the apostles traveled after Jesus was gone. As will be shown, the apostles of Christ traveled to all those lands where the descendants of Israel were settled, or their original cities of settlement. Evidence that the lost Israelites no longer lived in Palestine only is found in that Jesus told them that they would not go over all the cities of Israel before the Son of Man comes. If Israel was only within the narrow confines of Palestine, then Jesus' message would have filled the land in months. But the Son of Man still has not come, and yet Christianity is spread throughout the world, with new cities inhabited by Christians being built all the time. This is because the Abrahamic covenant has been fulfilled, that the seed of Abraham would literally fill the earth. Jesus spoke before the synagogue and declared, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach the acceptable year of the Lord and the day of vengeance of our God." This statement is the key to Jesus' message. It is a chronological statement and one totally ignored by Christian eschatologists. Ancient man was given a year-specific timeline of 6,000 years to the return of the chief cornerstone, a 6,000-year period that had a definitive begin date in 3895 BC when a major pole shift created a new heavens and a new earth, and it will end the 6,000th year in 2106 AD, which is 1 year after the 2105 end of all things, according to Nostradamus. This is the year 6000 Annus Mundi. Christian writers all too often proclaim that the timing of Armageddon is unknown or cannot be known, being God's secret, unaware that the 6,000-year countdown is discovered in so many different ways. They say that we cannot know the time because Scripture reads that no man know the day nor the hour. However, there is no bar to knowing the year. Now, Jesus is arrested after Judas the Jew betrays him for 30 pieces of silver, which was the price of a slave. Tradition holds, these are also Vatican texts, that Pilate's wife was a woman of Gaul. For those of you who don't know, Gaul was France. and that she had a nightmare that revealed to her the supernatural divinity of Jesus, in that he was far more than he claimed to be, and begged her husband to have nothing to do with Jesus' death. Her dream specifically portended an earthquake and the darkening of the sun. The presence of a woman of Gaul married to a Roman official is not surprising. In 37 AD, Pomponius Mela of Tangentira wrote in De Chronographia that there had been some Gauls in France that had relocated, sailing east to Palestine. Philo of Alexandria was a Jew alive at the time who wrote a history writing about Pilate, describing him as inflexible, merciless, and obstinate. Philo claimed that the Jews hated Pilate because of his severity, having ordered over 100 crucifixions. But the point here that's very interesting is that the ancient Israelites, Gaulonitis from Gaul, the Gaelic people, basically they're on both sides of the spectrum here. We have a woman of Gaul married to Pontius Pilate who washed his hands. He really didn't want to kill Jesus. He was trying to quell a Jewish rebellion, and he just accepted the lesser of two evils. The day Jesus was crucified, according to tradition, Gaius Cassius, later called Longinus, was a representative for Pilate who reported on the religious and political scene in Jerusalem. Because the Passover was approaching, the Jews wanted the three men on the crosses to be dead by sundown, so they petitioned the Romans to break their legs. When the soldiers broke the legs of the two men on either side of Jesus, Gaius Cassius, in an act of mercy, stabbed Jesus in the side with a spear, fulfilling two Old Testament prophecies. Isaiah wrote that a bone of him shall not be broken, and Ezekiel wrote that they shall look upon him whom they have pierced. The crucifixion of Jesus fulfilled an ancient motive. In human sacrifice in antiquity, the victim was bought for a price. The money paid absolved the people from guilt. The payment of a price to kill an innocent altered the act from murder to sacrifice. Jesus' price was 30 pieces of silver. The head of a sacrificial victim was anointed with oil, and Christ actually means anointed. It was important that the victim made no show of resistance, but had to accept his or her fate in order for the people to gain by the sacrifice. For this, drugs were often used to sedate the victim, and often after sedated, the bones of the victim were broken so as to prevent struggling of resistance once the sacrificial ceremony began. This was all common knowledge in the days of Isaiah, giving more meaning to the prophecy that no bones of Jesus would be broken. This meant that his sacrifice was completely voluntary, even though it was also literally fulfilled. This willingness made Jesus the kinsman redeemer of those he gave himself for. Jesus was executed upon a stauros, which is Greek for a stake. Roman crucifixion was not on a cross, but on a stake that the victims were nailed to. The majority of Christian authorities affirm that the date for the crucifixion was 33 AD. The year 33 AD is itself quite unimportant calendarically. Under any calendar system, 33 is basically, it's invisible. It has no parallels, no cross-calendrical parallels, no isometric projections. It's like the invisible year in world history. While this is noteworthy, we turn here to the erudition of Oswald Spengler, who, in his book, The Decline of the West, concerning Jesus' statement, "My kingdom is not of this world," wrote, "This is the final word which admits of no gloss, and on each must check the course wherein birth and nature have set him. There is no bridge between directional time and timeless eternity, between the course of history and the existence of a divine world order." While I have been unable to find any calendrical significance with the year 3927 Annus Mundi, which was 33 AD or 33 Common Era in our calendar, if you will look at this chart right here, this is a chart that shows the Phoenix history as it is revealed also through the chronometry of the Great Pyramid. The Phoenix history is fascinating. It was always a series of world destructions that was attached to the prophet Enoch and the Great Pyramid. But what's significant here is that the golden proportion, the most holy magical series of numbers in existence by which all physics constants are attached to, the golden proportion shows right here in the Phoenix timeline that 33 AD was 1.618 in proportion, like a fractal of time. Like everything of importance in world history happened on that date. In today's commercial society, we are made to believe all sorts of things that are untrue. 18 centuries ago, the social engineers of ancient Rome were no less designing and deceitful than those now operating in corporate America, our government agencies, and the media. They know that in the creation of mass deception, there is a fundamental that must be adhered to in order to be an effective deceiver. The fiction must be introduced along with a series of facts. Absorbing whole ethnic groups, foreign populations, their languages, creeds, and beliefs, the government of Rome had become too overspread, plagued by civil unrest. Though the political structure faltered and collapsed, Rome religious authorities did not fail to perceive a common thread of belief among all the diverse groups throughout their empire's vast provincial domains. In deepest Africa to the battlefields of the Germans, and from Gaul and the kingdoms of the Celts to the Western Europe to the civilizations of the Near East and abroad, all mankind knew of and feared the Phoenix. Many are the ancient chroniclers who left us records of the Phoenix. Some claim that it was a great round object that was in the heavens that drew close to the sun, darkening it, while others refer to it as a huge red star or even a fiery flaming sword in the sky. When the Phoenix appeared, it always brought earthquakes and the moon turned blood red. In fact, the Greek antiquarian Robert Graves, in his monumental book, The Greek Myths, translates Phoenix as meaning bloody red. It was this history of Phoenix disasters that the early Christian mythographers used to link fact with fiction. By the emergence of early Christianity, the knowledge of the periodicity, the timing of the Phoenix appearances was pretty much lost. The terrible disasters that all occurred 552 years apart, from the Great Flood in 2239 BC to the Ogygian Flood 552 years later in 1687 BC, and the 25-year darkness that followed and the starvation that killed the old Bronze Age civilizations, the disasters of 1135 BC and the Phoenix transit of 583 BC were remembered in a variety of ways, all the way to 31 BC when the Phoenix passed again, causing major earthquakes in Greece and Judea, and the knowledge of its periodicity was pretty much lost, but it was even recorded as a fiery red dragon over Egypt at that time. Over 140 years after the story of Jesus was alleged to have occurred, the account received an added dimension, claiming that the Phoenix appeared in the form of the darkening of the sun and earthquake at the crucifixion of Christ. By introducing an element of fiction on a background of fact, the church stole the Phoenix to authenticate their religious design. By the majority of Christian authorities, Jesus was crucified in 33 Common Era, 33 AD, or Anno Domini. The earliest documents belonging to Christianity make no mention of the darkening of the sun. They do not mention an earthquake. However, in 180 CE, the four Gospels suddenly appeared: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Prior to the appearance of these accounts, no church fathers left any records of the sun darkening. Now, in Matthew 27, verse 45, we read, "Now from the 6th hour there was a darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. Suddenly, this is reiterated in the Gospel of Nicodemus. A terrible darkness covered the whole land when the Christ was crucified. In fact, with the appearance of the church's official version of events, the four Gospels, many Christian writers openly claim that at the crucifixion of Jesus, the Phoenix made an appearance. One of the most widely known and easily proven forgeries from early Christianity is called Pilate's report to Tiberius Caesar, wherein we read, The sun was altogether hidden, and the sky appeared dark while it was yet day. Wherefore, I suppose your excellency is not unaware that in all the world they lighted their lamps from the 6th hour unto evening. And the moon, which was like blood, did not shine all night long, although it was at the full. So dreadful were the signs that men saw, both in the heavens and on the earth, that Dionysius the Areopagite is reported to have said, either the author of nature is suffering, or the universe itself is falling apart. Unfortunately, Dionysius neither wrote nor said any such thing, nor was he the only early authority to have had their observations stolen and words added to their accounts. Church officials destroyed all known copies of earlier records to conceal their misdeeds. The Dionysius account was of a phoenix event of the past contorted to suit their purpose. The same was done by Eusebius 3 centuries after the alleged crucifixion event. Eusebius was one of the main church fathers, but he lived centuries after the events that he depicts. He wrote that a pagan historian named Phlegon of Bithynia wrote in a book called Olympiads that the sun darkened and a terrible quake transpired that destroyed the city of Nice in Bithynia. But scholars have found no trace of Phlegon. No ancient authors mention him, though they do not cite him, nor are the books called Olympiads known to the multitudes of ancient authors who would have cited them. Either Phlegon was purely of church invention, 300 years after the fact, or the Phoenix event preserved by Phlegon was real, authentic account from an earlier time period not corresponding to 33 CE. Crucifixion timing, so the Olympiad text had to be destroyed, allowing Eusebius, a known forger and liar, to use the account with impunity. By adopting the Phoenix into their version of events, the church authorities gave people pause, many accepting the divinity of Jesus simply because his death was visited by the celestial and terrifying Phoenix. The history unveils how truly effective this common denominator was in bringing so many people into the Christian fold. The legend and story of the Phoenix was one of the greatest told in the ancient world simply because it was relevant to human survival. The church had stolen this concept to empower their position, knowing full well that the ideas attached to it, to the memories of the Phoenix, were of historical veracity. The Phoenix appeared to die as it collided into the sun, darkening it, casting the world in shadow much longer than an ordinary eclipse. But the sun and the Phoenix resurrected to repeat the drama all over again 552 years later. Life after death was a phoenix motif. In the archaic Egyptian city of On, also known as Anu and later by the Greeks as Heliopolis, was located the mansion of the Phoenix, where a holy relic stone called the Benben was protected, an old fragment of a meteorite. The Phoenix was known as the divine Bennu bird, and its disappearances and reappearances were linked to violent cosmic cycles and to the destruction and rebirth of world ages. An Egyptian papyrus written in Greek but dated as a copy of an older text from the time of Amenhotep reads, "For in the Typhon time the sun is veiled." This would refer to the sun darkening at the appearance of Typheon, or the Phoenix. In Egypt, the date palms were called phoenix palms. These trees held sacred to the reckoning of the times. Manly P. Hall, undisputably one of the greatest occultists who have ever lived, in his Secret Teachings of All Ages, wrote that it was the testimony of early writers that the Phoenix returned every 500 to 1,000 years. Its appearance in the sky was taken for a standard for measuring the motion of the heavenly bodies and the duration of the cycles of time. Clement, in the 2nd century Common Era, wrote that when the Phoenix appeared, the priests then inspect the registers of the dates and find that it has returned exactly as the 500th year was completed. 5 centuries, though, is wrong. By the time of early Christianity, the knowledge of the Phoenix appeared every 552 years had been completely lost. That it was known precisely in distant antiquity is proven in the predictions made by Atreus and Thales of Miletus. Stories of the Phoenix at the inception of the Christian movement were deeply embedded within the human psyche. Cycles of global disaster die hard. For this reason, the power of the early Christian gospel accounts came from its borrowed materials, the facts that were used to support the fiction. By adding the sun darkening and quake effect of Phoenix to the story of Jesus' crucifixion, the church brilliantly provided itself an historical touch to an imagined event. But this only worked because it was contrived centuries after it was supposed to have occurred. Anyone who has taken serious consideration of the alleged evidences of the gospel narratives will note that Paul nor any other New Testament writer mentioned the sun darkening or earthquake at Jesus' crucifixion. The Gospels were composed over a century and a half after the time period they allege to relate. Many of the parables and sayings of Jesus were taken straight out of Buddhist and Near Eastern texts. Jesus was the last popularized version of over 24 crucified saviors. No Christian documents antedating the Gospels mention the sun darkening or quake, and the church fathers' writings are very, very extensive. None of the historians, naturalists, or chronographers of Jesus' day mention him or the crucifixion. No authentic records exist concerning the sun darkening or quake. Cassius Dio, Pliny the Elder, Seneca, Tacitus, even the Jewish writers Philo Judaicus and Flavius Josephus are silent on the crucifixion, darkening of the sun, and quake. Eliminating all of the contrived historical statements in the Gospels leaves us with a narrative too similar to a Greek drama to be coincidence. A stage play production moving rapidly from scene to scene, a production of Galilee condemning the Jews for the murder of Jesus that took a life of its own in Antioch, the cradle of Christianity. The secret to the allure of Christianity lies in the antiquity of its elements. The Roman religious authorities attempted to bring together all people under its influence and power, choosing many symbols to perfect its purpose. The literal meaning of symbolic is to bring things together. Through the act of gathering, a religion is formed. The word religion meaning to bind. The word church itself is quite revealing, for it is a word derived from the name of a goddess or enchantress named Circe. She deceived men when they approached her, and she turned them into pigs, unclean animals. The Christian story is of extreme antiquity, antedating the biblical Christian movement by over 1,000 years, and the history of the Phoenix is far older. We have had to put together the pieces to unravel this deceit because the hundreds, perhaps thousands of texts from antiquity stored at the Pergamon Library, the Alexandrian Library, at Carthage and abroad were purposely burned by church officials and Roman officials in a series of purges designed to empower their own version of history while removing the true records that would have exposed their schemes. The historical records concerning the Phoenix are found in the books When the Sun Darkens and Nostradamus and Planets of Apocalypse. There was long ago an original Christianity, a core belief system before church officials introduced so many mythical fictions, a profound faith that is fully expounded upon in my newly revised and updated book, The Lost Scriptures of Giza, Enoch and the Secrets of the World's Oldest Texts. The antiquity of the Phoenix knowledge is very real and detailed as my books convey. As regarding the person and identity of Jesus, apparently in history there was a very unique figure. He did rock the boat, so to speak. He was profound in every sense of the word. We don't know if Jesus was a fiction later basically affixed to a person named Apollonius of Samaria, because their lives are parallel without the dressing. But the very earliest Christian records make no mention of anything supernatural, no healings. There is no sun darkening, no earthquake. There is no virgin birth. There is none of the miraculous things that you find in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are found in the very oldest Christian records. They are quite normal as a human who had some divine foresight, a teacher of righteousness, somebody who was not from Judea, had come in and introduced foreign elements that were profound, and the Jews hated him. Who he was, we don't know. But the evidence can suggest both. That he was a normal man who was divinely touched, or he was the divine pretending to be a normal man. You make the decision for yourself. We have evidence of both. Brahma and Saraswati, known in Genesis as Abram and Sarai, Abram was born in 1947-48 Annus Mundi, which was the old Hebrew reckoning year. It was the year of the rabbis. Now, this translates in our Anno-Domini calendar as 1947-48 BC. Very unusual. Again, this is simulation theory evidence that a calendar that was started in retrospect would line up so perfectly, especially considering the fact that this was the exact epicenter between the beginning of the Anno-Domini calendar and the beginning of the Annus Mundi original Hebrew calendar before rabbinical corruption. What this means is that Abraham was actually born at the intersect of two timekeeping systems, one going backward and one going forward. Very unusual. Therefore, Abraham and his message are palindromic. It's like a giant world history isometric projection, which leads us to year one being 3895 BC. And the end of that simulation being 1 AD, the beginning of the Anno-Domini calendar. Now, 3895 BC has been shown by multiple different calendrical patterns, ancient calendars, the conclusions of Emanuel Velikovsky and some of his dating. If his dating is correct, then year one would definitely be 3895 BC. Stephen Jones, in his Secrets of Time, independently dated that using the Assyrian eponyms and his own decoding of all the chronomarkers in the book of Jasher. There's just so many different ways to determine it. All these charts that you're seeing right now show that all these ancient calendrical systems basically use 3895 BC as year one. Now, the disservice that has been given to us from the rabbis of old and carried on into the future by Christians misunderstanding the text that they were studying is that year one was not the creation event. The world is not 6,000 years old. 3895 BC was year one of the ancient world because the Phoenix weapon had been activated and a 930-year-old civilization came to an end. It was a 30-degree displacement of the lithosphere that destroyed everything. Oceans slipped over their basins, continents were submerged, everything was destroyed in such totality that it began every single ancient calendrical system. It was a new heavens and new earth because now different star patterns were seen in different locations of the sky because of the 30-degree displacement of the entire surface of the world. We have shown in our many videos that the Phoenix is named. It was a testimony against the archons, those that believe they rule the world, that it is the mechanism of apocalypse and it is responsible for so many of the resets and cataclysms throughout world history. These have been definitively documented in our 14 or 15 videos that are primarily about just the Phoenix phenomenon. If you want to know the history, check it out. We're not going to get into that in this video. The subject matter of all these videos serves to show that these timelines go all the way up to the year 1902 and for a very profound reason. Not just what occurred in 1902, but calendarically in the holosphere what 1902 represents. We are also reminded that in the ancient world, the person of Enoch/Enki was deeply associated with the architecture of the Great Pyramid of Egypt. The entire ascendant passage, gallery, and king's chamber distance is precisely 3895 inches, where it ends at the descending passage conjunct. The BC timeline collapsing into the Common Era, or the Anno Domini timeline, at the exact chronometrical location that forms the year 5796, or in our calendar, 1902. We find here an internal chronometrical timeline indicating the year 5796, when the architecture now shifts its focus from the internal to the external. 1902 AD thus becomes year one of an entirely new calendar, and the exterior of the monument now provides the chronometry revealing the end of the Great Pyramid calendar. And the architecture of the Great Pyramid has always been self-referencing over and over again. It provides many ways to measure the exact same thing. This is absolutely phenomenal monument, a piece of architecture that we're incapable of replicating what was done. This holographic timepiece in stone, and all the measurements are absolutely scientific by Sir Flinders Petrie accepted today. A true mine of enigmas. In the book of the Secrets of Enoch, we read this passage. He wrote all these signs of the creation which the Lord created, and wrote 366 books, and handed them over to his sons, and remained on earth 30 days, and was again taken up into heaven on the 6th day of the month Siphon, on the very day and hour when he was born. In verse 6, we read that Methuselah and his brethren, all the sons of Enoch, made haste and erected an altar at the place called Achuzzan, where Enoch had been taken up into heaven. In my very first published book, The Lost Scriptures of Giza, is definitively shown that the place called Achuzzan was later known as Giza, that it was regarded as an altar of God in the land of Egypt. And now look at this chart. Again, we find right here a biblical verse in the book of Isaiah that says the exact same thing. In that day there shall be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar at the border. Border means Giza. Giza means border. Thereof to the Lord. And it shall be for a sign and for a witness unto the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt. This is the altar of Adam. This is also the pillar of Enoch. They are one in the same. And the geometrical value for this passage is 5448, which just happens to be exactly the height of the Great Pyramid today, minus the chief cornerstone, 5,448 inches. The reason this is relevant is because the intended geometrical height of the Great Pyramid, if it had its capstone, would be 5,814 inches, which is 366 inches higher than it is today. Why is this relevant? Because Enoch was said to have written 366 books, but this is a code. We're talking about the chief cornerstone arriving to sit upon the monument of man. A book is merely a container of knowledge. There are 366 units here that identify this chief cornerstone. But the book is not an actual book. It's what the chief cornerstone represents. In the beginning, there were two trees. Two great pyramids mirrored these trees. One was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. One was the tree of life. The tree of life seems to have prevailed. This is 366. This is the book of life we are seeing in code here, and we can prove it even further using the calendar. The sloping angles of the four sides of the Great Pyramid are 51.51 degrees. Added together, these four slopes create the number 204. The apocryphal books of 1st and 2nd Esdras were removed from the canon of Scripture because they contain more information than the clergy or the Roman papacy wanted the people to know. Ezra is the reason why we know that the biblical books of Ezra and Nehemiah were forgeries, because it's admitted so in these apocryphal texts. And it's also Ezra that continues this code about the books. In 2nd Ezra 14:44, we read, in 40 days they wrote 204 books. The they are the angels that appeared to Esdras and conveyed to him the histories of the world in the past and in the future. These 204 books, again, books are merely containers of knowledge. And how the number 204 relates to the Great Pyramid has been seen, but now we're going to show it to you in the calendar. In this picture, you're looking at the book of life. Each stone is a soul of man. This book of life is sitting upon a foundation which provides year one to the return of the chief cornerstone, the apex that will sit upon the monument of man. And in this book of life of stones, you're looking at the gate of God. This is the Phoenix Gate. This is the principal message of the Great Pyramid. And now to the final years of the Giza course countdown. The writings of Enoch convey very specifically that his messages and his work was for a far future generation. It was for a generation in the last days. Therefore, we can now interpret with this entire phenomenon of the Great Pyramid and the Phoenix linked together what it means for us today. Both the Phoenix history that is well documented and the chronometry of the Great Pyramid, which is well established in the linear measurements and rectilinear measurements of Sir Flinders Petrie, which are scientifically accepted today, we find that the year 1902 is the principal message of the Great Pyramid's last days calendar, the Giza course countdown. Every single course of blocks in the Great Pyramid represents a single year in the last days. 1902 is the foundation. There are 203 levels of blocks on the Great Pyramid that start from the ground and ascend all the way up to an empty platform, which is the 204th block. The 204th level, I mean. 203 years on top of 1902, this countdown of 203 years leads to the year 2105 AD, which was the year as a great consummation according to the prophet Nostradamus, as seen in our prior videos. This is not my conclusion at all, but taken from a published book from a Nostradamus author. Now, this is the year from 3895 BC, the Annus Mundi system, original Hebraic. This is the year 5999, which is not only my conclusion from the Phoenix dates, but also Stephen Jones, who put together an entire world chronology from sources I didn't even have access to at the time. We are looking at the Book of Life, counting down the years until it will receive its maker, the chief cornerstone, the stone the builders rejected. This monument once covered in 144,000 white limestone casing blocks that were later removed after earthquakes. This great, fantastic monument that is so misunderstood by humanity. This is the last day's countdown. This countdown began in 1902, and it shows Armageddon in the year 2106 AD. This calendar was built in the beginning, but its purpose was for the end. It's been with us all of this time, but it was never meant to be understood until the last days. The prophet Enoch, many of his writings are totally misunderstood because they have no context for any time prior to now. It's for the last days. To the ancient Vikings, the Norse, Phoenix was represented as Skull, a wolf monster, or the fiery flaming Fenris, the wolf, very phonetically akin to Phoenix. In the Weird of the Gods of the Ragnarok, we read that he will swallow the moon, spattering blood throughout the sky and all of the heavens. The whole earth together with the mountains will start to shake, so that the trees will loosen from the ground and mountains will fall. Next will come an event thought to be of much more importance. Skull, a wolf monster in the sky, will capture Sol, the sun, and offer her to Fenris the wolf. The wolf will swallow the sun, and mankind will think it has suffered a terrible disaster. The stars will disappear from the heavens. The Fenris wolf advances with its mouth gaping. Its upper jaw reaches the heavens, and the lower one drops to the earth. Flames shoot out of his eyes and nostrils, and the sea will surge on land. The storm ascends to the heavens itself and flows over the earth when the sky is split. In this Viking Elder Edda, the Ragnarok period of the end days is characterized by an increase of evil and violence, brother slaying brother, and battles all over the world. In this year, Skull will swallow the sun and the moon will be devoured. The heavens and the air become sprayed with blood as unburied corpses litter the ground. Thus begins the Fimbul winter. 3 years the sun gives no warmth. In the old Viking stories, all prophecies declared that Fenris was fated to be their destruction. We are not surprised to find that the Norse Ragnarok comes from 2 Old Norse words, Ragna and Rakar, meaning the day of darkness. In the Ragnarok traditions, the Fenris wolf howls and much destruction is wrought upon the earth. This is an indication of a noise coming from the sky, such as we have documented over many times concerning the Phoenix phenomenon, and the oceans rising up out of their basins, the sun darkening, great destruction and cataclysm, and a horn-like noise from the sky seems to be a common denominator with Mother Shipton of Yorkshire as well. She said this concerning 1 century after a second world war. In fear and trembling this shall do, flee to the mountains and the dens, to bog and forest and wild fens, for storms will rage and oceans roar, when Gabriel stands on sea and shore, and he blows his wondrous horn. Old worlds die, and new be born. A fiery dragon will cross the sky, 6 times before this earth shall die. Mankind will tremble and frightened be, for this 6 heralds in this prophecy. For 7 days and 7 nights, man will watch this awesome sight. The tides will rise beyond their ken to bite away the shores, and then the mountains will begin to roar, and earthquakes split the plain to shore. Then flooding waters rushing in will flood the lands with such a din, that mankind cowers in muddy fen and snarls about his fellow men. He bares his teeth and fights and kills, and secretes food in secret hills, and ugly in his fear he lies, to kill marauders, thieves, and spies. Man flees in terror from the floods, and kills and rapes and lies in blood, and spilling blood by mankind's hands will stain and bitter many lands. And when the dragon's tail is gone, man forgets and smiles, carries on, to apply himself. Too late, for mankind has earned deserved fate. His masked smile, his false grandeur, will serve the gods their anger stir, and they will send the dragon back to light the sky. His tail will crack upon the earth and rend the earth, and mankind shall flee lord and serf. But slowly they are routed out to seek diminishing water spout, and men will die of thirst before the oceans rise to mount the shore, and lands will crack and rend anew. You think it strange, it will come true. Very interesting here how she mentions that the dragon's tail will crack the earth. This is also akin to the Norse prophecies of the Ragnarok, because while the wolves are attacking the sun and moon, Fenris and the other catastrophic wolf, the Midgard serpent, is also encircling and crushing the world and spewing venom, making it hard for men to breathe and eat. Mother Shipton concludes that the dragon's tail is but a sign for mankind's fall and man's decline. Now, this 6th Sky Dragon episode of Mother Shipton is very reminiscent of the 6th seal of the Apocalypse in the book of Revelation, which reads, "And I beheld when he had opened the 6th seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood, and the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs, when she is shaken of a mighty wind. And the heavens departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places." This is a absolutely perfect, ancient, literate description of a pole shift. The slipping of the lithosphere, probably 30 degrees, maybe more, but a complete pole shift, which will result in oceans slipping from their basins, cities dipping straight off the coast into the ocean. It's harrowing, but here it is described perfectly in a biblical passage. In the book of Enoch, we learned that the patriarchal prophet was shown a vision of the future when the pillar, which is a symbol for axis, of the earth shook from its foundation, and the sound was heard from the extremities of the earth. Remember, we have a sound again. We have noise being an element of last days prophecies. About 18 centuries later, the psalmist wrote, "Therefore we will not fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea." To declare such a faith implies that in some remote epoch of human experience, the earth had indeed undergone some major changes. That the biblical evidence for the Phoenix phenomenon cannot be easily disregarded can be seen in the obscurely dated biblical book of Job. Scholars are at variance over the antiquity of this text because it is very old, but most agree that it is the oldest book of the Bible. The text in the book of Job reads, "I would seek unto God, and unto God would I commit my cause, which doeth great things and unsearchable, marvelous things without number. He taketh the wise in their own craftiness, and the counsel of the forward is carried headlong. They meet with darkness in the daytime and grope in the noonday as in at night. That's Job chapter 5, 8 through 9, and 13 through 14. The prophet Isaiah was a prolific writer. He was an Israelite, not a Jewish prophet. And he wrote a lot on the future apocalypse, writing that the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light, and the sun shall be darkened in his goings forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine. I will shake the heavens, and the earth shall be removed from her place. Isaiah also wrote, the Lord maketh the earth empty, and maketh it waste, and turneth it upside down, and scattereth abroad the inhabitants thereof. The prophet Ezekiel provides us even more detail in confirmation of this thesis. He wrote that God said, I will cover the heaven and make the stars thereof dark. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon shall not give her light. And all the bright stars over heaven shall I make dark over you. This is no ordinary cloud. But as we have been shown in the 1902 material and 1687 material, these are vast, vast mud flood type reddish rains that basically blot out everything in the sky. The prophet Joel not only reconfirms this future event, but even provides a clue as to the timing. He wrote, the earth shall quake before them, the heavens shall tremble, the sun and moon shall be darkened, and the stars shall withdraw their shining. And I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. In the ancient Zoroastrian faith of Iran, there is a specific order of events that will occur in the last days. And the very first of those events is that the sun will go dark. This will be followed by the world battered by a mighty storm, a star falling from the heavens, a terrible battle being fought, and then a new dawn for humanity when people won't die. But the initial catalyst, the first event that marks the last days to the Zoroastrian, according to Ahura Mazda, is the sun going dark. Another intriguing biblical statement is in the book of Matthew, where we find that the last days shall be as in the days of Noah. Well, this is a pretty interesting clue, because as in the days of Noah, as we have shown in our many videos and 2 published books, as in the days of Noah was 2239 BC, a huge cataclysm that reset every single Bronze Age civilization, knocked them on their asses. And this was exactly a Phoenix episode. We have shown that after the flood, there was like a worldwide cooling period. Whole areas were still frozen. And in 1687 BC, there is 2 accounts from opposite hemispheres that describe the 25-year-long winter that occurred after the flood of Ogyges, which was also caused by the Phoenix phenomenon. And in the what's really interesting is in the Zoroastrian faith, the sun darkening also causes a 30-year-long winter. This again is mirrored by the Fenris and the Ragnarok, also talking about the Thimble winter that begins. These are common denominators spread all over the world, basically describing our future. The Gnostic text on the origin of the world, also shown priorly in our videos on the Phoenix, actually names the Phoenix as responsible for the destroying of the ancient world. And it also reads that the Phoenix will return in the last days to darken the sun and moon and cause oceanic chaos. Now, these ancient prophecies help us better understand what Nostradamus saw coming in the year 2040. And we have a video on 2 videos on Nostradamus and how he dated in secret, in code, his quatrains. And for the year 2040, this is what he said. The great star will burn for 7 days, and the cloud will make the sun appear double. The large mastiff will howl all night when the great pontiff changes his abode. Now, we're not going to go into all the details. Those videos describe exactly what every symbol is, but it's describing a pole shift when the sun darkens. The prophet Nostradamus also wrote, he will appear towards the north, not far from the bearded star in Cancer. Susa Ciem Boeotia Eritrea, the great man of Rome will die, the night dispersed. A short while before a king is murdered, Castor and Pollux in the ship, a bearded star, public treasure plundered on land and sea. Pisa, Asti, Terrera, and Turin are forbidden territories. And again, we don't need to go into all the details, but there's a flood. Those territories are absolutely forbidden because nobody can breathe underwater. Nostradamus continues, the trembling of the earth at Martera, the 10 island of St. George, half sunk. Drowsy with peace, war will arise at Easter. In the temple, abysses are opened. The new empire in desolation will be changed from the northern pole. From Sicily will come such trouble that it will bother the Enterprise tributary to Philip. And that was a really good description of a pole shift. He also wrote, the moon eclipsed in great gloom, his brother becomes the color of blood. The great one, hidden for a long time in the shadows, will hold a blade in the bloody wound. Now, I'm not going to beat you up with a whole bunch of facts that have already been recorded in published books, over 200 posts, and, I don't know, maybe 17 or 18 videos. But to conclude this video, it is very important for you to realize that the secret societies of which the Masons, Freemasons are but one, they have always known that this phenomenon occurs, and they always prepare for it, and they build underground cities, bunkers, deep earth biospheres, and they even reveal these things to us in code, such as the 33rd degree of Freemasonry, which has never been published for the public, and it can still not be found anywhere. They have kept it a secret. However, all 32 degrees, when you break them down in their symbols, you will find how human history has unfolded and the things that they have done to prepare for not only the continued rulership of the world, but how the elite even prepare to survive. But the 33rd degree is simply shown as a symbol, and that symbol is the phoenix. They know the phoenix is the symbol itself for a burned world that is reborn. In this Masonic symbolism, the elitists wait for the destruction that will be caused by Phoenix so they can come out of their bunkers and then bring a new world into being with them in control, with them guiding. And this has happened over and over and over. And I will show you right here that this exact same scenario is prophesied by Mother Shipton, which is not in our prior videos. I'm going to read for you a passage by Mother Shipton where she predicts exactly this, except in her prediction, the evil elite have been destroyed in this Phoenix cataclysm. And it's somebody else coming up. It's other survivors who have prepared, who don't have world domination on their mind. Here is the excerpt. Mother Shipton wrote, and in some far-off distant land, some men of such a tiny band will have to leave their solid mount and span the earth, those few to count. Who survives this and then begin the human race again, but not on land already there, but on ocean beds, stark, dry, and bare. Not every soul on earth will die as the dragon's tail goes sweeping by. Not every land on earth will sink, but these will wallow in stench and stink of rotting bodies of beasts and man, of vegetation crisped on land. But the land that rises from the sea will be dry and clean and soft and free of mankind's dirt, and therefore be the source of man's new dynasty. And before the race is built anew, a silver serpent comes to view, and spews out men of like unknown, to mingle with the earth now grown, cold from its heat, and these men can enlighten the minds of future man, to intermingle and show them how to live and love and thus endow the children with the second sight, a natural thing, so that they might grow graceful, humble, and when they do, the golden age will start anew. So here it is, this millennial biblical type of message of hope coming from a woman that was burned at the stake like a witch, a prophetess, never harmed anyone. It is shameful in today's modern society so many take offense at any broach of the topic of race as if it is a subject hallowed, not to be spoken nor explored. Our ancient masters wanted it this way. If you get offended at what you read or hear, why not analyze why? Emotional responses seem to be all that the majority are able to produce, and the reasoning for this is programming. The media takes great advantage of this, knowing that frenzied emotional reaction to troubling data is all most people are capable of. Don't be a victim anymore. We are who we are for reasons beyond our control. Race is not a subject to be shunned, but to explore. In prior videos, it has already been explained that the exiled Jews in Babylonia misunderstood the many references to the Adamu in the records of the great libraries, changing Adamu from its original description of the human race before the deluge cataclysm to a pronoun for an individual's name. They created Adam. This is why, after Adam was mentioned in Genesis, he is then forgotten in the vast archives of the Old Testament. Only in the late rabbinical works after the Jews came back from Babylon did the writings of Adam surface, pure priestly inventions like the Book of Adam and Eve. The father of humanity should have been mentioned everywhere in the Holy Writ, but he is not, because he was never a man, but instead a designation for early mankind, the ancient Semitic Adamu. The Chaldean account of the creation shows that there was an original race of men at the beginning of Chaldean history, a dark race, the Zalmat Kakadi, who were called Adami or Adami, as opposed to the light-skinned race called the Sarku or Sharku. Shar is a title for a ruler. Ignatius Donnelly wrote, "The name Adam is used in these legends, but as the name of a race, not of a person." The Jewish chronographers exiled to Babylonia invented the Adam to Seth lineage, making Enoch the seventh, misunderstanding the older Babylonian references to Adamu for what they were describing as early humans, a dark and red-skinned race with black hair and eyes and smooth skin with no facial hair, who were created by the Anunnaki. The Genesis and Sumerian accounts of Noah's lineage do not disagree. Enki created primitive humans from primate ANUNNA DNA, and then manufactured an upgraded type of humans by adding more Anunnaki DNA. Enki then used ANUNNA females to birth the upgrades which produced civilized humans that could procreate on their own. These were first the Adamu, and of this stock were Oriental people, the black-headed people, a description used by the Sumerians to describe themselves over and over in their writings. The writings describing history before the Great Flood have the common theme that initially the entire world was populated by black-haired, black-eyed people of small stature and brown and red skin, smooth, no hair on their bodies and no beards. It was a world when Caucasians did not exist, at least in this world, in the same continents as those that recorded these histories and their traditions. As will be seen in another video, the first appearance of white people was a major theme of the pre-flood world. Scientifically, the racial differences between Negroid, Mongoloid, Amerindic, and Caucasoid are inexplicable. Skull thickness, cranial proportions and capacity, skeletal structure, musculature, blood types, pigmentation, dermal thickness, cerebral development, protuberance of features, the hair and eye color of the dark pre-Caucasian humans are not the result of natural selection or evolution, but the product of genetic engineering using core primate DNA with infusions of their own coding. Humans are the product of 30,000 genes separated only by 300 genes from chimpanzees, a 1% difference. But humans contain 223 genes that have no evolutionary predecessors. And with genes, even only a few genetic variations can result in vast differences. Where did these 223 genes come from? For they link every human type on this planet together. Homo Annuna brought these genes here. Geneticists know that over 98% of human DNA is identical to that of chimpanzees. Only 1 through 4% of modern human DNA is Neanderthalic. However, this 1 through 4% is not found in native African Negroid DNA. The more we discover, the more evidence we find of different DNA designer programs effected in antiquity to populate the Earth. In tracking mitochondrial DNA back as far as it can go, has revealed to geneticists that the modern human race is a family of 33 clans. What makes the human species human is not our pedigree, but our spirituality. Our bodies are but biological containers, DNA preservations housing lost but immortal spirits. The myriads of gene combinations are why life can exist in virtually every biospheric condition. Human DNA is extraterrestrial, interplanetary, and quite likely intergalactic. The earlier Earth-born races of Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon were long ago distinguished from the Moon-born races of dark humans linked culturally by their veneration of goddesses, matriarchal peoples before the Great Deluge Cataclysm in the month of May 2239 BC. Negroid, Mongoloid, Amerindic, and Dark Caucasoid, the 4 great brother races of remembered antiquity who existed on Earth before the white Caucasian race and their own patriarchal sun cultures, the bearded white children of the sun called Shemsu-Hor in ancient Egypt. The moon goddess cultures venerated the mother of all living, her symbol for over 3,000 years of both antediluvian and post-flood history being the crescent moon. The dark Homo sapiens recalled their origin from Homo ANUNNA birth goddesses, who descended from the lunar habitats when the moon was deliberately placed in its dead orbit by the ANUNNA in the year 4039 BC. These ANUNNA, better known as Anunnaki later by the Babylonians, were rebels of their race who called the moon by the name of Sin. It was a title later attached to them by humans when they became known as the Sinners, who birthed the first Adamu, the first people. Hopi tradition tells that their ancestors arrived to the 4th world by migrating through 3 previous worlds by the aid of Spider Grandmother. Osage's Indians of North American plains tell that they once lived in the sky way beyond the earth. They were the children of the sun and moon, told by their moon mother to go live on the earth. The Senecas were descended from the Star Woman. There are so many recorded traditions of non-Caucasian peoples remembering that their origin was from a creatrix or from the moon that we cannot possibly list them all here. While the dark races were programmed to obey, to follow, they were also heavily edited, their coding modified to impede creativity, genetic barriers erected, governors set in place to guarantee that upon their own initiative, they could not knit together the requisite thoughts that would guide them toward any productivity that would result in erecting a civilization to rival the ANUNNA. The mistakes made with Cro-Magnon would not be revisited, and we will do a video on that. These genetic parameters have functioned so perfectly for so long that every Negroid, Mongolid, Amerindic, and Oriental people have, since the collapse of their ancient civilization, have continued for thousands of years as Neolithic farmers and hunter-gatherers unless they profited by contact with another Caucasian people, as in the 3rd millennium BC, when the Amorite, Hurrian, Aryan migrations into the Near East, India, Palestine, and Egypt, and again in these last 4 centuries with the global European colonization of the world. This was a genetic program that was instigated by people so they could not rival their creators. The establishment version of human racial evolution propagated today is extremely racist, proclaiming that modern humans descended from monkeys. The truth is occulted that Homo sapiens are the amalgamation of many parts, and yes, chimpanzee DNA is greatly a part of our genetic makeup. But the differences between human types is not from evolutionary development. The bullcrap passed off as history we are force-fed is wrong. Contrary to what is popularly taught, the Amerindian of North America is not Asian. They did not cross a frozen land bridge over the Pacific or Atlantic. O blood type is the prevailing type of the American Indians, but Orientals are almost all B types. From the Mongolian stock, further modification produced the High Oriental, civilized goddess worshippers, the first Homo sapiens civilized culture after Cro-Magnon, the pre-flood ancestors of the Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, Vietnamese, and other Oriental peoples today. These High Orientals were also the predecessors of the white Caucasian peoples who were not yet settled on this earth. That the goddess cults and matriarchal cultures are much older than the appearance of Caucasians in this world, in the traditions of the world, cannot be disputed. Beginning in 4039 BC with the sudden appearance of Luna, the capture flood in Earth's orbit, the Anunna began a 144-year campaign inside lunar habitats, creating colonies of Negroid, Mongolid, Amerindic, and Dark Caucasoid peoples. Through the birth goddesses campaigns, these grew in population and were kept separate deliberately, kept inside their lunar habitats until the pass of the Phoenix weapon in 3895 BC, which started a new heavens and new earth through a pole shift cataclysm. When Phoenix transited in 3895 BC, the earth suffered a devastating pole shift, quakes, floods, volcanic fallout, meteoric rains as entire continents slipped under oceans, and new seas appeared on what was formerly dry land. It was indeed a new heavens and new earth. They were effected, for the stars were no longer in the places they had been. The new pole star became Alpha Draconis, the eye of the dragon, and the moon age began that would last 1,656 years to the Great Flood. This is the 1656 years mentioned in Genesis. This age is characterized by the appearance of the vapor canopy that hid the sun by day while diffusing light in the temperate to tropical world, while magnifying the moon and stars at night, as the dark side of the atmosphere became a nightly magnifying lens into the heavens. The anciently popular legends of the birth of the sun are memories of the collapse of this vapor canopy at the Great Deluge in 2239 BC, again by the Phoenix weapon. During the pre-flood world, the entire day's sky was well lit, but the vapor canopy blocked out the circular orb of the sun. During the 3895 BC pole shift destruction, the last of the Neanderthal vanished and the Cro-Magnon population was totally decimated. The Anunna planted their new Homo sapien colonies in different areas of the world. The invention of races, a deliberate act of divisiveness. Much of the confusion and disparities between elements of the same stories that have survived the ancient world of legends, oral traditions, written records are reconciled by acknowledging that we are today looking backward to the memories of 2 or 3 entirely different groups. The indigenous recollections of pre-Caucasian people who held that they were created by hideous reptoid beings does not nullify the later Caucasian records of Amorite-dominated Babylonia and Sumer that the bearded white human race was created by bearded white human-like gods. Dark humans anciently recalled the Nordic appearances of gods and the unexpected births of white babies, but Caucasian legends and lore have only remembered white Caucasian gods and predecessors. It is as if the Caucasian mindset has been scrubbed of its own history. Anunnaki human unions continued for at least 6 centuries, the 2 separate races sharing the same gene pool. This history is considered today definitely racist, but nonetheless true, and supported by non-Caucasian ancient testimony. The entire Genesis 6 passage concerning the sons of gods and the daughters of men that created a mighty race of heroes, men of renown, is the old world's testimony of the birth of a new race into the world before the flood. The Caucasian race, who inherited the height, intellect, physical characteristics, beards and eyes, and knowledges and technology of their Homo Anunna fathers. In the story of the Anunnaki, we have the appearance on Earth of ghost white spacefaring humans from somewhere else who through a premeditated plan modified a small population out of the vast hordes of dark peoples on this planet and refined them to the point where they could easily procreate with them with no complications. These visitors bestow information and technology to their new genetic counterparts and then disappeared again in most part, though there is evidence that a faction of the Anunna remained on Earth to eventually marry into, build family dynasties, and die among their earthborn kin. Those who from heaven to earth fell, or Anunnaki, were never gods. They were humans who had gone extremely pale with fair eyes and hair by living in an entirely different biosphere. Every human on Earth today is in some degree Anunnaki descended. We possess all their genetics. Sumerians prided themselves as being the black-headed people, and pictures on their reliefs show them as smooth skin with no facial hair, but on their seals, statuary, and reliefs, the gods, called Anunna in Sumer, are always depicted with bearded faces. The Genesis text reads, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness." And also, "Behold, the man has become as one of us to discern good and evil." This addendum about good and evil is not a part of the earlier Sumerian traditions, but it's a religionist addition to the story that totally ensnares humanity in a spiritual conflict that originally found fault and error only in the action of the gods, our creators, in the manufacturing of humans, the created. The original sin was never ours. Not only were the narratives of Sumerian antiquity given as first-person accounts, as also found in the book of Genesis, told to the people by the Anunna themselves, but some Anunnaki never left Earth. They remained marooned to live among the human family. William Brambley in Gods of Eden wrote, "Human beings appear to be a slave race, languishing on an isolated planet in a small galaxy. As such, the human race was once a source of labor for an extraterrestrial civilization and still remains a possession today." When modern Homo sapiens served and lived among Homo Annuna from 3439 BC to 2647 BC, the concept of their world was more sophisticated than mankind 1,000 years later. The threefold division of reality concerned the heavens, the realm of the gods, the Annuna, what we call space, and earth, where men lived with the gods, and the underworld, or the deep, the Abzu, ruled by the serpent, who was Enki, father of the Caucasian race. The Nordic division was similar to the Sumerian beliefs. Earth was Midgard, and the underworld was Nephilim, the land of the elves, the alien greys, the Semitic Nephilim, being the fallen ones who fathered the Caucasian offspring of the sons of gods, Anunnaki. Long after the departure of the Annunna in 2647 BC, this threefold division took on the religious concepts of a heaven independent of interplanetary space, an earth where gods did not physically exist, and a hell instead of a network of deep earth biospheres, the underground habitats occupied not by colonies of Anunnaki, greys, and humans, but by demons, elves, and dwarves. As these videos will show, in the progression of the data as it unfolds, the Caucasian race was created long after the races were already well established on this earth. And the Caucasian race was established because of a major rift in Annunna society. There was a war, and in this civil war, the revolters, the rebellers, those who were considered the bad guys, in an effort to continue the propagation of their own species, Earthside created the Caucasian race as an act of rebellion. The ancient person Enki violated the pre-flood status quo. He led a benefactor sect of Homo Annuna who committed the ultimate treachery against their own civilization. By mating physically with their product, the daughters of men, these rebellious Annuna fathered the ancestors of the Caucasian race, its Aryan and Semitic branches, who not only inherited the fair-featured characteristics of these benefactors, but also received some technology, written records, knowledges, and the genetic traits of imagination, creativity, inventiveness, abstraction, and the colonial spirit. While all races have proven to be equally intelligent as Caucasians, the entire history of the world's past 5,000 years demonstrates century by century that Homo Annunna's synaptic fail-safes have without fail retarded the ability, the growth, and the prosperity of all races except Caucasians. The Anunnaki histories have basically oversimplified the ancient phenomenon of a genetic war that was fought against mankind. Also, the oversimplification of the Anunnaki as being strictly an extraterrestrial species of aliens ignores the great variety of types mentioned or alluded to in the ancient texts as pieced together by Sitchin and many other authors. Anunna, who had never left Nibiru, their home, who had descended to Earth, those who had descended to Earth, who later became a separate group, those who were born on Earth from off-world parents, those who were born on Earth of unions between off-world and earthborn parents, those who were born of parents both earthborn. These distinctions are mentionable because of the complexities of DNA, activation, deactivation of whole gene sequences, or latent genes programmed to respond to certain environmental stimuli as cells transfer information at conception with the influence of various biospheres. We can add to this list the Anunna who were stationed or born in lunar habitats, the Anunna who were born on Mars, which was called Lamu, the Igigi, the Watchers, the Anunna who were born on way stations in the Sol system or in the Nemesis system where they had come from, on asteroids and other lunar bodies that we're unfamiliar with. The variations in the human genome due to these disparate environments may not have been so marked. However, when crossbreeding with Homo sapiens at different stages of genetic manufacturing, the changes barely noticed between Anunna of variant backgrounds actually produced drastic changes in Homo sapiens descended from them. There are no ancient references to an Anunnaki crossbreeding with Negroid humans. In fact, Homo sapiens, including Negroid, were not considered breeding stock until they were upgraded as Adamu, from the birth goddesses campaigns. The red-skinned, black-haired, black-eyed, smooth-skinned humans able to procreate on their own. To date, we have found the archaeological evidence of cities and civilizations that reached a very high level of sophistication, built by Negroid, by Mongoloid, by the Amerindic and the Dark Caucasoid races of the past. But in every instance, those civilizations collapsed and fell. Whereas when Caucasians spread around the world and began colonizing and reintroducing elements of civilization, these civilizations again had a renaissance, and they revived. And in every historical instance, a phoenix cataclysm totally ended every civilization that had reached such a high attainability, except for those who suffered the genetic fail-safes that they basically imploded their own cultures. It's like a genetic attack. It was by design. After experimental periods were conducted, once DNA compatibility was maintained, the several different types of Anunna mated with the daughters of men, producing Homo sapiens sapiens who physically appeared in the likeness of their Anunna fathers. In the beginning of this interbreeding campaign, there was a great diversity which produced Caucasian groups, all being bearded. These groups were very tall, blonde, blue, hazel, gray, green-eyed. Average height, blonde, blue, hazel, gray, and green-eyed. Very tall, with red hair, blue, hazel, gray, or green-eyed. And average height, which was red-haired, blue, hazel, gray, or green-eyed. 4 different types, all varying in different body types, but basically of the same parentage. Caucasians today with brown and black hair or eyes is simply due to the same intermarriages, migrations, and conquests that resulted with the non-Caucasians today having blue, hazel, gray, and green eyes and lighter, fairer features and even facial hair. The Anunna born on Earth were not Nibiru loyalists. Earth native Anunna had little in common with space-born Anunna, and the second-generation Earth-born Anunna even less. In the time before the deluge, rivalries in Anunnaki colonies probably transferred to rivalries among the human workers of different regions, also developing into human breeding programs left off at variant stages of racial maturation. The manufacturing of human workers was interrupted by conflict, hastened, altered to produce armies quickly. In the days before the Great Flood cataclysm in the 23rd century BC, a human's physical coloring and features marked him like a brand. Designer DNA allowing Anunna overlords to know what product belonged to them or to another. Ownership of worker humans could not be argued when physical traits separated Homo sapiens from other Homo sapiens with totally different characteristics because they were owned by someone else. The common denominator between the antediluvian DNA designer worker races was that of dark skin, black hair and eyes, and smooth skin with no beards. The world was filled with millions of these Negroid, Mongoloid, Amerindic, and Dark Caucasoid peoples who all venerated the mother goddess and all claimed the moon as the symbol of their race. The minority before the deluge during the period of 2839 to 2239 BC were white-skinned, fair-eyed, and featured Caucasians who were directly fathered by the Anunna, a race of patriarchal people who remembered their origin from male gods, a new race of fair-featured people that the dark races called the children of the sun. This distinction, initially racial for the fiery golden color hair of Caucasian heads, quickly degenerated into complex solar and lunar dynasties that fashioned religions preserving the lunar goddess connection and solar all-father relationship. Humans focusing on humans after the departure of the Anunna in 2647 BC, the final year of the contact period, led to the stellar theologies of subordinate deities, the Anunna in service to a goddess, the moon or god, the sun. Sin, the name of the moon, was originally male in the Sumerian text, but this gender identity among goddess worshippers fell into disrepute, just as did the older solar goddess associations in the Far East. Although in the context of this video and other videos I continually reference the Anunnaki as gods, you must understand I'm only referencing in that way because that's what they were regarded as. However, the evidence is very clear that a very strange pale race showed up among the dark races. These people had beards and they were regarded as gods, but they were human. There is no doubt in my mind that these were merely humans coming from somewhere else, either deep earth biospheres after a cataclysm or from an entirely different continent. This great division in the pre-flood world separating the Caucasian civilizers from all the lunar goddess venerating dark races manifested in a whole new unique way after the vanishing of the gods. End of the contact period in 2647 BC. Two major cultural themes survived the pre-flood world to be carried on after the destruction. Two competing ways of life clashed, forging two distinct types of dynasties, the Hunter Kings and the Shepherd Kings. These divisions among the human family were at variance with one another, and their ethnicities were markedly different. The Hurrian, Aryan, Amorite, Syrian, Phoenician, Israelite, Ionian, fair-featured white descendants of Noah and Enoch,.Enki, founded the powerful Shepherd King dynasties of the Western Fertile Crescent. Egypt, Libya, Mitanni, Urartu, India, Anatolia, Syria, Lebanon in the Bronze Age, 2nd millennium BC. The Shepherd King civilizations were patriarchal with trade alliance economies, all maritime nations, great builders, spiritual instructors, establishers of law codes and societies, mighty in war and expert navigators. As saviors of human communities victimized by raiding nomads and upholders of civilization and law, the Caucasian Shepherd King nations and occupying dynasties continued the legacy of the benevolent Anunna who had bioengineered the white-bearded people and then bred with them. In ancient Peru, in China, in India, and in Egypt, these civilizers appeared and brought renaissance to these indigenous populations and built a mighty empire which would later resurrect as the Heliolithic maritime empire, for which we will be doing a video about. The Hunter Kings were aggressors, tyrants, destroyers of the harvest, humanity, opposed to the Shepherd Kings who protected the flock. In the Jewish narrative of Genesis, this is found in the conflict between the gentle Jacob and his violent brother Esau, the hunter. The major distinction between the nations having Hunter King and Shepherd King dynasties was entirely racial. Nomadic, Negroid, Mongoloid, Amerindic, and Dark Caucasoid hunter-gatherers made up the Hunter Kings of Dravidian India, Africa, Arabia that founded the early post-Diluvian cultures of Egypt, the Indus, Akkad, Babylonia, Hittite Anatolia before the Shepherd Kings imposed their own dynasties over them by conquer. The Shepherd Kings were not the only Caucasians, but as descendants of Enki, Enoch, they were the fairest, having the most Anunna DNA. The Aryans were not hunters or nomads as collective ways of life, but dwelt in towns with highways. They employed a decimal system of enumeration. Max Muller wrote that this was one of the most marvelous achievements of the human mind based on an abstract conception of quantity. And it was used everywhere in the trade alliances set up by the Aryans and the Hurrian dynasties. In Hindu traditional histories, the Asuras were a race of elder gods born of venerated mothers to Caspaya. The non-Aryan Asuras were already established when a second race was suddenly born called the Adityas, who quickly rose to dominance and were resented by the older Asuras. The Wars of Gods and Men, Zecharia Sitchin notes that the non-Aryan name of Asuras was of Near Eastern origin akin to Ashur, Asar, Osiris, and that in Hindu tradition, the Asuras became evil gods or demons, whereas the Adatyas assumed the role of gods. Envy and contention between the first race and that which came after led to war during a time when Earth produced food without cultivation, when a global famine occurred. The Satapatha Brahmana reads of a widespread conflict, wars fought for superiority and resources. The gods, Adatyas, vanquished the Asuras, who later rose up and defeated the gods. Ultimately, the gods finally put down the Asuras. We have, in this Hindu tradition, the pre-flood memory of the Asuras and the two distinct types of Homo sapiens, those of older dark humans venerating their mother goddesses and the later patriarchal Aryan Adatyas, the sons of the gods. We have, right here, preserved in Vedic traditions, a major worldwide racial conflict involving everybody against Caucasians before the flood. That the Anunna were not gods is demonstrated in that Zecharia Sitchin had found references to an Anunna belief in the identity of the creator of all, who influenced Enki, who we know as Enoch, to create humanity and again prompt him to warn humans of the coming flood. After the deluge, at seeing that pockets of humans survived the disaster, many Anunna concluded that it was the will of the creator of all that they should live. It seems clear that the white-bearded Anunnaki race were entirely human. They are indistinguishable from the fairest of European Caucasians today. They were not gods in any sense of the word. Putting all the pieces together, we have a world filled with humans after the fading away of Cro-Magnon, a world full of Homo sapiens of four primary racial groups. Their world was interrupted by the sudden appearance of technologically advanced Caucasians that they mistook for gods, people who came from somewhere else, and thus began the traditions of the fifth brother race. To better understand the genetic manipulation, why it was necessary for someone in ancient past to genetically damage people on this planet, we have to go back and look at what happened with the Cro-Magnon. And we have to throw away the BS the establishment has told us about them because it's wrong. The story of the Cro-Magnon is both fascinating and absolutely tragic. The entire Cro-Magnon image of the anthropologist is a lie. One of the greatest anthropological mysteries of prehistory is how the Neanderthal abruptly appeared all over this earth. And then, evolution cannot explain the abrupt disappearance of Neanderthal, a whole well-entrenched species. So baffling and damaging is this sudden appearance that the scientific acudummies have over and over been caught manufacturing fake fossil hominid predecessors to Neanderthal. They even passed off on us pig bones. No anthropoids have long hair growing from the top of their heads, so how did humans acquire it? The anthropoids have thick body hair. Humans are basically hairless. Natural selection could never have phased out body hair while increasing the hair on the top of the head. Humans do have chimpanzee DNA, but the entire archaeological record of any evolutionary development between chimp ancestors and descended humans exists nowhere on Earth. Professor Isley wrote, I voiced the suspicion that Homo sapiens became separated from the ape tribe by a deliberately planned mutation. Yes, that quote was from over 50 years ago. David Icke, a very controversial writer, wrote, the reason science has been unable to find missing links in human genetic evolution is because there aren't any. The sudden changes in the human form were due to extraterrestrial intervention. Again, 50 years ago, Max Flint and Otto Binder wrote, if something does not work solely by blind chance, who is tipping the scales? My answer is Homo Annuna, more popularly referred to as the Anunnaki. Before 5239 BC, Homo Annunnas returned to the Earth's surface to find that their robust, dark-skinned hominid upgrade manufactured at their previous visit, known to us as Neanderthal, were inadequate for their mining needs. Unsupervised, this primitive Homo inferior has fallen into disorganized hunter-gatherer groups who domiciled in caves rather than work them for ore. While bred for strength, they were intelligent and artistic. The disappointed ANUNNA visiting Earth let them be and redesigned Homo inferior into a more capable worker. This is Cro-Magnon, who exploded onto the scene. No evolutionary development, just appeared. Whole communities of Cro-Magnon. Today, scientists accept that Neanderthals were not human ancestors, but were an entirely different race. Mitochondrial DNA analysis concludes that Neanderthals did not contribute substantially to the modern human genome. Cro-Magnon man is an anomaly, superior to Neanderthal and of an independent lineage. Cro-Magnon appeared suddenly with mysteriously improved skeletal characteristics and with a cranial capacity that is amazingly in excess of 100 cubic centimeters of that of modern man. M.D. Shorn in Elder Gods in Antiquity wrote that Cro-Magnon man simply appeared suddenly on Earth within the midst of Neanderthals. Science simply does not know how such an event could have occurred. What? These brainiacs assert that the dinosaurs were wiped out 65 million years ago and that Cro-Magnon were supposed to be 64.5 million years closer in time to us today, and they can't solve this local mystery? So much for nicely packaged theories. Cro-Magnon man is classified as Homo sapiens sapiens. It's the same as us. It is a theory that Cro-Magnon wiped out the Neanderthal. The Cro-Magnon are not descended from Neanderthal no more than Homo sapiens are direct descendants from Cro-Magnon. In fact, the mystery of Cro-Magnon is heightened when comparing his anatomy to ours. Though his average height was 6'1.5, that's 6 foot and 1.5 inches, but with relatively short arms, which is a sign of high development, his brain case was extraordinarily large in capacity, much larger than ours today. The larger Cro-Magnon are measured at 6'7" feet tall, and interestingly, Cro-Magnon women were petite. This is evidence of a race with superior intellectual development and a long history of civilized living, allowing for their females to cease growing to proportionate stature with the males of their race. That could have only happened in a sedentary atmosphere. M.D. Shorn relates that the Cro-Magnon was a powerfully built Caucasoid race, white, wearing sewn embroidered clothing of skins, who was also wore modern trousers, jackets, and hats. Cro-Magnon people looked like any Midwestern farmer of the 1930s in rural America. Cro-Magnon wore a cap, trousers, tunics, and moccasin-like shoes. The men sported beards and mustaches, and the women had elaborately parted or braided hair. Remember, we're talking about a race of people who existed before Elam, Egypt, Sumer, Akkad, Eritrea, Mitanni, the Urubamba Valley, the Harappan civilization, the ancient Sino-Chinese empire of the Yellow Yangtze River, the South American empire. Every single known historical civilization to date came way after the people that I'm describing right now. A global freezing ended the conditions and civilizations of a prior world where Cro-Magnon thrived as the Neanderthal waned. A history for which there are no monuments, no artifacts, no memories, and virtually no ancient records save a few fragments that mention the prehistoric catastrophe before the beginning of our own Homo sapiens age of urbanization that began circa 3400 BC. The Cro-Magnon we have excavated and studied, a post-cataclysmic culture after an ice age period, is clearly seen in that the Cro-Magnon lived and hunted in a world of the megafauna. Enormous mammals like the mammoth depicted in Cro-Magnon are now known to have been a temperate to tropical animal. The high cultivation and potential of Cro-Magnon were the magnum opus of Homo Annunna's genetic engineering, and therefore a threat. In unrecorded history prior to 4309 BC, when their civilization was destroyed, Homo Annunna visited Earth, created Cro-Magnon after using mammalian DNA after a period of development and failures. The product complete and performing as intended, Homo Annunna had departed. But upon their return to the planet, they found the thriving Cro-Magnon civilization was in full bloom. They had broken the chains of slavery, driven Neanderthal to the caves of the earth, mastered nature, established societies, learned how to modify holospheric reality to conform to their will, and Cro-Magnon genius had discovered the greatest revelation of all, their immortality. That physical life was merely a temporary path to a personal, eternal existence. Homo Annuna found, to their dismay, that they had manufactured a sentient species having the potential to rival their own superiority, having the intellect and spiritual intuition to someday realize that they were actually confined in a holospheric prison and quite possibly how to collapse it. Furious, Homo Annuna modified Cro-Magnon coding in a dangerous series of alterations that created monsters bereft of souls, hybrids, insensate bodies, creatures more than creations. DNA is fantastically ancient and still a mystery to extraterrestrial civilizations. Homo Annuna learned that DNA is pro-life, self-aware, sentient, and that the creations of new sentient beings can only be effected by merging pre-existing coding with pre-existent sentient DNA. Before seeking to destroy them, Homo Annuna manufactured Cro-Magnon to perfection by simply taking chimpanzee mammalian DNA and grafting in whole sequences of their own, Annunna DNA. Not enough Annunna DNA resulted in the earlier Neanderthal, and too much had now resulted in Cro-Magnon. The genetic palindromes, the latent genes switched off, are mysterious, but it is obvious that once created, DNA itself maintains a fail-safe guardian protocol that prohibits the erasing of life forms imbued with intelligence. The coding defense mechanism disallows conception, disallows propagation of a contaminated species. The Annunna, having made Cro-Magnon close to their own image, discovered to their dismay that they could by no manipulation unmake him. Their first trespass was now compounded by another. The Annunna made diluted DNA clones that could not reproduce. Production of clones resulted in a worthless workforce. With Cro-Magnon thriving on Earth, the Annunna further added to their crimes in the design, manufacture, and implementation of a devastating device, the Phoenix weapon. My books, When the Sun Darkens and Nostradamus and Plans of Apocalypse, as well as over 14 or 15 of the videos on this channel and several posts go into great detail on this Annunna technology. See the Phoenix calendar. It has been shown extensively that deployment of this weapon causes terrestrial disasters of local, hemispheric, and sometimes worldwide dimensions and always bathes the earth in a red dust that falls to the surface like fine powder or as a red rain that visits with terrible earthquakes and a horn-like sound that vibrates so catastrophically that whole cities and people are sink straight into the ground. The first deployment of the Phoenix weapon was against Cro-Magnon civilization. Many millions died, survivors scattered during a cataclysm of quakes, volcanic resurfacing, flooding, and red mud fallout from the sky. It is this history that solves a great anthropological mystery that has perplexed the Academys. The use of red ochre in dressing the dead for burial. Red ochre use is evidence of a sentimental race wanting all of their dead to be rejoined in an afterlife. This nightmarish end of their civilization was dressed in red blood rains, red muds from the sky, and choking reddish dust. From that point onward, Cro-Magnon added to the dead host on the other side, all those who passed over afterward, a reddish ochre placed into their graves in commemoration of how they fell. The past is always a predicate for the future. What Cro-Magnon suffered, the absolute catastrophic collapse of their civilization's entire infrastructure, is going to happen to us as well. Many books, posts, and Archaic's YouTube videos show this to be dated at precisely May 15th, May 16th of the year 2040. Of further significance is we know in the biblical passages it says the last days are going to be as the days of Noah. And in the days of Noah, apparently we had cloning. Apparently we had the birth of mutants. We had genetic manipulation. We had extreme, huge cultural and nationwide racial issues and problems between peoples on this planet. It says these issues from antiquity that happened right before a devastating cataclysm have all revisited us again. We are cloning again. We've seen clones in the media. We are conducting genetic manipulations. The cloning of the sheep Dolly in 1999 was just the beginning. And the mapping of the genome project in 2001, that was 50 years after we had really done it. It said, like I said, the past is a predicate for the future. The things that were happening, this Cro-Magnon civilization, these people were no different than us. They had buttons on their flies. They wore tassels on their dresses. They wore sandals. They wore suspenders. They had hats. They wore pants. It's ridiculous how similar the ancient world is to what is transpiring today. This concludes the third video of this series, the ANUNNA Files. Our point here in this video is to show that the racial problems that were occurring just before the flood, the manipulations, the actual creation of retardation genes that would create arrested development as soon as the Negroid, the Mongoloid, the Amerindic, the High Oriental, the Dark Caucasoid, when they attained a plateau and a period of enlightenment, vast metropolis, a huge infrastructure, great cities, once they reached a certain height, their own genetics would make war against them and collapse their civilizations. Genetic warfare, it was all created in antiquity. It's still done today, but it's all coming to an end. This is a series of simulated holographies that were all interwoven into a matrix that we call the past. And they're unwinding. Entropy has set in. Things are falling apart. Revelations are being made. People are being awakened. Those who concentrate on the issues are going to get swallowed by them. This is Jason of Archaics.com. This is our fourth video in the series of the ANUNNA Files. Now, we have already mentioned that race is a very delicate issue, and we want to respectfully submit to you, our listeners, that we decided as the Archaics team not to really approach this topic until we had already had a significant presence. And I think 105 videos is significant enough. We have already put well over 100 videos before we decided to talk about this, but these are issues that need to be discussed because we have to understand what's happening in the world today. Because what is unfolding in our current paradigm is absolutely attached and moored through. It's tethered to the events of the past. The space-time continuum is a very interesting thing, and reality tunnels can exist for thousands of years before they collapse. So don't be offended by the things you hear. Assess them. Don't take offense, because no one can ever predict who they're going to be born into. But you forget, before you take offense, go back and listen to our prior videos. Several videos in the past, we have explained that because we believe that we exist in a series of holographic template simulations, we also hold it to be true that we have lived many lifetimes. We have all been every race on this planet. Who you are now is nothing but the architecture of a physical avatar pretending to be in a physical world, imprisoning a spiritual being. That's who you are right now. Your personality is what makes you divine. The peptides and RNA and DNA gene palindromic sequences that make up who you are is not you. It's a physical husk. It's a shell. But the history of the world is racial. And before the flood, race wars erupted. 300 years after the flood, we haven't got to the Battle of Crucifixion yet. We're having an entire video being prepared on that one. But it was a race war. The Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, the Puranas, the Atharva Veda, man, we have all the elements of race wars in the past. There's nothing new under the sun. And I want to specify that it is my personal belief through years of research that this racial problem isn't ours. We can't control our genetics. It was programmed. It's not normal. Man, I've got some guys, man, that I am really cool with that are not white guys. And you know what? It doesn't matter. When we're together, man, there's a spiritual bond. There's a friendship. It's just, this racial paradigm that we're in today is foisted upon us. And the fires are stoked by the media. We can't allow this to continue. We need to explore where it came from. It starts with the ANUNNA. It starts in the world before the flood. In the world before the flood, we are told, as in the days of Noah, so also shall be the coming of the Son of Man. And all the Son of Man prophecies, no matter what you believe, if you're a student of the Gnosis like I am, or if you're a Christian, or if you're a Muslim and you're believing in the coming of the Mahdi, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we're in this together, and that there is something in this holography that's trying to keep us apart. Don't get mad about what you hear. Just think about it. Every single human being in this world has varying amounts of Anunnaki DNA. To be led, but not initiate. To comprehend, but not conceive. The masses of humanity suffered a genetic programming of arrested development. Designer DNA by Homo Annuna scientists who had figured out how to keep their human subordinates docile and ignorant, yet teachable. The Homo sapiens of all races, from Negroid to Caucasoid, were perfectly enslaved by masters who programmed synaptic failsafes to switch off any time a human mind wandered beyond recognizable frames of reference. Because of this programming, Negroid, Mongolid, Dark Caucasoid, Amerindic, and High Oriental from the Neolithic to Agrarian remained virtually unchanged until they experienced contact with the civilized people. Without civilized immersion into a more advanced culture, their programming resets them right back into their pre-civilized patterns. So effective was this genetic dampening that it was not until the European colonial period, when Caucasians introduced modern civilization into China, India, the Middle East, Australia, the Americas, and South America, that these genetically damaged peoples around the world benefited from, copied, and began contributing to the modern infrastructure from their prior old primitive patterns. The dark-haired white people called Iberians anciently inhabited Spain, Gaul, the British Isles, colonized Sicily, and were the original settlers of Italy and Sardinia and even Libya. It is theorized that the dark-haired stock of early Sweden and Norway is also of Iberian stock. Of the Turduli and the Turdentani Iberians, Strabo, over 2,000 years ago, wrote that they employ the arts of writing and have written books containing memorials of very ancient times. The last surviving population of Iberians not absorbed into the other Mediterranean races of today are the Basques, of darker complexion than the Spaniards, with gray eyes and black hair. This Iberian stock settled in the earliest times in Ireland, forming the base of the dark-haired population of Britain and Scotland. These darker, short Bretons are in stark contrast to the tall, white-skinned, blue-eyed Celts with their blonde hair. There are no known written texts older than 2200 BC. Even the Sumerian records are post-2200 BC, though report to be copies of older writings and even depict events that date as early as 3800 BC. The oldest writings in the world are not religious. They tell matter-of-factly of gods that manufactured humans both before and after major disasters. The only architectural presence of humans known to archaeology prior to 2200 BC are town-sized settlements, many exhibiting evidence of advanced urban engineering and planning, the scattered survivors of a prior civilization destroyed by a cataclysm anterior to that of the Great Flood of 2239 BC. Because of these facts, we have had to rely solely on secondhand information and traditions. But we are fortunate, for out of this wealth of lore and legends has come forth common themes that cannot be denied, for they remain intact in both hemispheres. They claim that gods came to earth. Early humans worshipped, served, and fought for them. The same gods that created the four brother races, black, brown, red, and yellow. During this period, white people did not exist. There are no Negroid, Mongolid, Amerindic traditions of a pre-flood world, but all remember a great flood. Is this not unusual? Only the Oriental peoples preserve literary records with the Caucasians concerning antediluvian histories. The Orientals during the contact period of 3439 to 2647 BC, when the Anunna lived among mankind, were the most genetically refined Homo sapiens of the Anunnaki birth goddesses program, having the most modified DNA compatible with Annunna biology. In 2839 BC, the Annunna factions began a widespread breeding campaign that resulted in the birth of the Caucasian race in the Igigi-born Nephilim races. Enki and the Annunna, loyal to him, used Oriental females in birthing Caucasians instead of the older scheme of using Annunna females who conceived through artificial inception, until the Adamas could conceive on their own. These were the first people. But the Igigi, who had not participated in the Enki-led long genetic refining process took the daughters of men, of Mongoloids, Amerindics, Dark Caucasoids, and Negroids, and they gave birth to other peoples, some small, others gigantic, mutants with 6 fingers and toes on their limbs, monsters. Their activities were unsanctioned and unprotected, and this is why the Igigi rebellion had taken place. This was the origin of the Nephilim. In 2839 to 2647 BC, the contact period, only the Oriental civilization of Asia maintained a culture and geography extending back to the antediluvian world. As the greatest creations of the custodial society of the Anunna, the Oriental race is the older half-brother to the Nohakian white sons of the custodians. While even as late as the 20th century CE and today, 5,000 years has not improved the Neolithic hunter-gatherer mindset of Negroid, Mongoloid, and Amerindic people still spread across third world bushlands from Australia, Southeast Central Asia, and Africa, and Central and South America. If the infrastructure for civilization is not provided for them, they never invent one on their own. The non-Europoid peoples have over and over through 42.5 centuries of recorded history since the Great Cataclysm in 2239 BC been introduced to higher culture, have developed great cities and civilizations, philosophical systems, economies, trade routes, but something has always impeded any further development. A reset set into their very genetics, a weapon of DNA. Even flourishing when living among Homo Annuna, the Orientals and Caucasians, as long as the contact persisted, but when abandoned, when contact was severed or diminished, in every historical instance, these peoples collapsed back into barbarism, back to hand-to-mouth Neolithic patterns of totemic hunter-gatherers. World history is evidence alone of the long-standing dominance of the Oriental and the Aryan civilizations in the Far East and the Far West. The Oriental was programmed to stay in the Orient. Asians were very rarely colonizers outside of Asia. Many firsts belonged to China, Japan, Korea, and other Asian peoples when explosions of intellectual brilliance manifested, but the overall genetic coding of racial, cultural, mental stability of the race over and over stamped out the achievements and discoveries. The Aryan, though originating in the Far East, was specifically programmed to colonize, migrate, explore, build, invent, maintain a Western movement. The Aryan breeding produced a builder race, innovators, creators of governments, religions, philosophies, agriculture, and designers of vast infrastructures with great imaginations, the direct inheritors of traits formerly belonging only to Homo Annuna. The Asian Oriental was the epitome of Anunnaki genetic in vitro fertilization engineering using Anunnaki birth goddesses. The Oriental spirit of permanence, patience, humility, preservation of cultural institutions over millennia, explosions of brilliance only to be snuffed out by the masses programmed to maintain the status quo. The Anunnaki coded humans to obey, to carry out routines, to bear circumstances with little thought of altering their conditions. Orientals are fantastic culture bearers, carrying their civilization virtually unchanged for over 4,000 years until Caucasians arrived on their shores in the last 140 years and using military ships made them open their ports and included them in the glowing global industrial technological complex. By the earliest accounts, the Caucasian race came from the Far East, the ancient Ainu of Japan, the Caucasians of the Sino Valley. The Caucasian skeletons have been found everywhere in China. This is easily found. You can do your own research on that. But they have always maintained a Western movement and moved into the Near East long after it was established. In fact, the entire Tarim Basin used to be a Caucasian civilization until it was met with the Black Star of Cataclysm. The Anunnaki themselves had sons and daughters, and many took lovers from among the growing masses of humanity that were becoming more and more in their own likeness. By the time the Anunnaki departed Earth, they had left behind human races in various gradations of development, from primitive workers to civilized Orientals, the black-headed people, and finally the Caucasian Indo-Aryan race of blonde, red-haired, blue-eyed, green-eyed people who served as the genetic descendants closest to resemble their Anunnaki masters. All races have Anunna DNA. All are made in the image coding of the pseudo-gods. That the Caucasian race is related to the older Asian Oriental race is also the conclusion of the historian Lenormand, who wrote, All appearances would lead us to regard the Tauranian race as the first branch of the family of Japheth, which went forth into the world, and by the premature separation, by an isolated and antagonistic existence, took or rather preserved a completely distinct physiognomy. It is a type of the white race imperfectly developed. Winchell concludes that the Genesis 10 genealogical table is not intended to include the Negroes, or the Chinese, the Japanese, or the American red men. I repeat, if you're not following, the Jewish written Genesis table of nations, which is supposed to include the entire world who separated from the Babel cataclysm and went in all different directions, it doesn't mention any of these people in those writings. It refers altogether to the Mediterranean races, the Aryans, the Cushites, the Phoenicians, the Hebrews, and the Egyptians. The descendants of Noah were a race whose homeland was destroyed by a flood. The flooding may have occurred worldwide, but not in all areas. Chinese, Mongolid, Negroid, Amerindic people survived uninterrupted in hunter-gatherer totem societies, save for the sophisticated agrarian urban culture of China. The table of nations in Genesis was copied and amended as the Jewish priests saw fit, stealing the data from older Amorite records in Babylon. In those days, when the genealogies were drafted to include in the new 5th century BC Genesis text, they wanted to put in the front of their holy writ the existence of other races to the Jews was not known. Therefore, they were not included. They did not know about the Chinese and the Korean and the Japanese, the Ainu. They knew nothing about them, so they didn't create them in their book of Genesis. Caucasians are the very last to enter into the world scene in modern times, post-Cro-Magnon. Thousands of historic and modern testimonies concerning extraterrestrial contact have witnesses describing the alien beings as tall, blue-eyed, blonde, human-like entities that are usually accompanied by servile, fetus-like aliens much shorter. This intriguing description is of the modern Nordics, the Nephilim, hybrids being genetically created by the fetus-like corporal dark angels that are building a race of semi-giants as they had done twice in biblical history. In the days of Noah, both before and after the flood. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and tall features are descriptive of the Egyptian racial portraits and reliefs in the temples cited earlier in these works on the temples of Karnak, of the Sabaeans, the Amorites, and the Anakim, the Tamahu, all partially descended from the Anunna. These mysterious aliens, witnessed by thousands of people, are described by Raymond E. Fowler in his epic book, The Watchers, as tall, blonde, robed, human-like entities. Interestingly, the gods Osiris and Orion, Nimrod, were regarded as being the same deity to the early Egyptians. He too wore a robe with many eyes like a watcher. This description calls to mind the Sumerian giant Gilgamesh, whose name means son of the sun, and the angelic watchers that descended and taught men the secrets of God in exchange for the daughters of men. Concerning the strange physical characteristics of the gods of the mysterious Sumerians, Eric von Daniken proclaims that the figures and statues of these people appear to fit no racial group known on Earth, having goggle eyes, domed foreheads, narrow lips, and generally long, straight noses. Traits cited that belong to the Amorite and Anakim giants and the large Aryan mummies in the Chinese Taklamakan Desert. In The Two Babylons by Alexander Hislop, we discover that the racial traits of gods and goddesses around the world from Babylonia, Egypt, India, Greece, and Rome were of blue or gray-eyed, blonde-haired entities with fair features. In more contemporary times, the high Nordic appearance of humans belonged to fairy children. Catherine Briggs, in her huge book, An Encyclopedia of Fairies, writes that when fairies search for mortal children of a golden-haired child is far more in danger of being stolen by the fairies than a dark one. In the Encyclopedia of Fairies on page 62, Captives in Fairyland, we read that trolls derive from Nordic beliefs in fairies. These creatures were associated to the underworld and stole small children and sometimes even swapped troll babies for human infants. Some trolls were giants that guarded passes or bridges, like the Nephilim of old. The motive assigned to fairies in northern countries is that of preserving and improving their race. On the one hand, by carrying off human children to be brought up among the elves and to become united with them, and on the other hand, by obtaining the milk and fostering of human mothers for their own offspring. Such traditions of fair-featured infants took on other forms in other cultures. In the Yarison text of the 13th century Common Era, or I believe it's Ayahab ol Malukat, the race of pre-human genies, jinn, were shape-changers that could appear as snakes or scorpions or men. These jinn were on earth before Adam, or the Adamu, before the first people, having been ousted from the heavens. They were accused of switching infants of their own race with human babies. And Muslim traditions hold that the children of the jinn had white European features. The Shamaneh, written by Arab poet Ferdowsi, a Muslim of Eastern Persia, composed the work based from older traditions. It is called the Book of Kings, claiming that Zal, who is a hero like Noah, survivor of a flood, was a son of the Devic race, an ancient race of gods. As attested in the Book of Enoch, the Dead Sea text, and the Arabic Shamaneh, Andrew Collins observed that the antediluvian patriarchs of the Old Testament would seem to have had a very similar aversion to infants born with what appeared to have been extremely white Caucasian features. This is not me, guys. This is from Andrew Collins, a renowned international author, in his book, From the Ashes of Angels, on page 112. The flood hero Noah was born in 2839 BC, the year 1056 of the pre-flood calendar, the Annus Mundi system. In the Book of Enoch, we find that at the birth of Noah, his father Lamech was alarmed, for the infant Noah was white as snow and red as the blooming of a rose, and the hair of his head and his long locks were white as wool, and his eyes were beautiful. And when he opened up his eyes, he lighted up the whole house like the sun. Lamech told Methuselah, a very ancient man at the time, that I have begotten a strange son, diverse from and unlike men, and resembling one of the sons of the gods of heaven. And his nature is different. He is not like us. The fear of antediluvian people was that they were too small compared to the fair-featured figures they were referring to as gods, the Anunna, tall, bearded Caucasians. To primitive, uneducated people, these strangers were with pale features and white skin were angels. The Ethiopian Kebra Nagas text reveals that the children born to angels through the daughters of the Canaanites were so large that women were ripped open. You must remember, these ancient stories are from the perspective of people who have never seen Caucasians before, and they were very small. They had smooth skin. They were dark-skinned, dark-eyed, dark-featured, and they were very petite bodies. And to them, Caucasians appeared to be as giants. Enki, who we know as Enoch, and his loyalists mated with these females of the civilized humans who gave birth to the first Caucasoid baby, Noah, in 2839 BC. The many Anunna or Anunnaki sons of God took the many daughters of men and begat the Caucasian race rapidly. It was a program. The first generation of infants born were Caucasians having dark recessive gene characteristics, white people with dark hair and dark eyes, but the second and third generation females were fair, appearing more and more like the Anunna themselves. The Anunna human crossbreeding program, sometime after the start of the contact period in 3439 BC, but in 2839 BC, the project was completed with the birth of Homo sapiens who were of the same DNA and appearance as Homo Anunna. They were indistinguishable. Caucasians were very tall compared to the darker races before the flood, bearded, which to the other races was a mark of godhood, with white skin and eyes like gemstones. These beards are the reason why the Egyptian pharaohs always wore wooden beards. They remembered ancient dynasties of ruling Caucasians who were bearded, and it was a sign of their divinity. The pharaohs had smooth skin and could not grow hair on their faces, so they had ornamental beards made of wood, and they were dipped in gold. And this is why we have so many statues of Egyptians with hairless faces wearing fake beards. It was out of this genetic campaign that Enki took a fair female and fathered the famous Noah, an extremely white, blue-eyed, blonde child in the 600th year before the Great Flood. This began the Noachian race, called in antiquity by other races as the sons of the sun because of the color of their skin and hair, and in ancient Egypt as Shemsu Hor, and after the flood as the shepherd kings. Zechariah Sitchin, writing of the birth of Noah, described him as white as snow his skin was, the color of wool was his hair, like the skies were his eyes, blue. This is in the Lost Book of Enki. I don't know what Sitchin's source materials are, but they're definitely Near Eastern. He might have copied that straight out of the Book of Enoch. But that's on page 204. So with this whole historical phenomenon of the arrival of the Anunnaki, basically, in my opinion, as someone who has read well over 1,000 books on ancient history, I don't care about YouTube videos. I don't even watch other channels. You will never see me cite another channel or an internet source. I'm not going to do it. But in my own research, I am painting a picture. Our predecessors believed in the arrival of white gods that came and gave birth to civilization and created these different races and divisiveness. And I don't see that. What I see is that after a total world-destroying cataclysm, a Caucasian race who had been underground for a very long period of time and could not deal with the sun. Their skin was too translucent. Their eyes were way too sensitive. They knew in order to survive, they had to take some of the human stock that was surviving on the surface, and they interbred with them. And in doing that, we have the normal Caucasians of today. This is the story that I'm seeing. And as with many historical episodes that are recorded much later in time, we have embellishments. It wasn't gods descending from the sky. It was people coming up from the earth, from their deep earth biospheres, a technologically advanced, very intelligent race of people who had survived a global cataclysm. And when they did, they found nothing but Neolithic hunter-gatherers, Negroid, Mongolid, Oriental, Aboriginal, Dark Caucasoid, Iberian. This is what they found. And this huge story about the Anunnaki and the aliens coming from, it just didn't happen. Whoever these people were, they're trapped in this holography with us. Welcome to the new social media for the freethinker, the platform for those who do not identify with the collective, Archaics Underground. Explore the 30+ galleries and spaces and interact with kindred souls all over the world, some in your own community. Meet others in Errant's chat underground. See or report what's happening in your part of the world. Find others that are close to you. See services and advertise your own in Errant's personals. Chat with others and share paranormal experiences. Review the massive posts on deep and revealing movies and music that drop real secrets about our world. And look at the health and wellness posts for tips and helps on the human body. You will find hilarious and thought-provoking stuff in meme warfare. Look over and even contribute to the 2026 Isometric Analysis Project and check out the tips and post-reset pantry and survival tips. Some of you will want to join the Archaic Sentinels as we take deep dives into other content creators' paywalls and search for evidence of integrity or grifters lifting others' content. Explore the audio files of Archaic's videos and watch the library of Archaic's videos that are not on YouTube. Look over and download the fascinating old books of the Underground Vault Library, or dive in and read the hundreds of articles, posts, and transcripts composed in my decades of research. Review the detailed Archaic's charts separated by topics easily followed, and read and contribute to the massive library of powerful quotes. You can read and post your own findings on the years 1901, 1902, and 1903 as we build the database, or look over the post in Flat Plane Examine on toroidal mechanics and simulation theory models of the world. Laugh and even contribute to lifestyles of the grifting and infamous, and post your questions that you want me to answer in live videos on YouTube. Get help with all things Archaics in the admin chat, and look over and post your own arts and crafts and talents. Look over the immense data on the Great Pyramid and Chief Cornerstone research and review book recommendations about other errants and even post your own. Check out out-of-place artifacts and mysterious history for intriguing facts about our history and world. And in Immortal Methods, See the techniques, affirmations, and practices that have worked for others in their manifestations of their wants. New spaces will be added, one being on the facts of Christianity very soon. Join us in this explosive community of souls, all sharing this experience.